Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. The funeral home next door has wandering clientele. Sometimes I think we may have been too eager to own a home. If we had taken our time and been more discerning, we probably would not have ended up as involuntary hosts to the dozens of yearly visitors that wander onto our property from the small business next door. We live next to a funeral home. And by next to, I mean if our two buildings were any closer together, they could be condensed into a townhouse. A small strip of yellowish-green grass barely wide enough to fit two people side by side is all that separates our properties. And evidently that strip belongs to my wife and me, because if we don't mow it, it doesn't get cut. Really, I should say that we live behind a funeral home, because while it is our closest neighboring property on our left side, that side of our house is actually facing its rear. The funeral home is on the corner of our block, and its entrance is situated more or less perpendicular to our front door on the wall farthest from our house. The strange juxtaposition of our two buildings' orientations is ugly and a little uncanny. But I suppose I can't complain, because it means that I rarely have to see the funeral home's clientele, or at the very least, their living clientele. The listing for our house didn't say anything about it being next to a funeral home, and when we pulled up to view it, we were more than a little put off by the prospect of living next to a building that at any given time would most likely contain at least one dead person. But the price was right, and after months of bad luck with the housing market, along with the expiration of our apartment lease quickly approaching, we jumped at the chance to finally have a place we could call our own. Besides, my wife and I both hold a fascination with all things paranormal and macabre. We spent our entire first date gushing over ghost shows and talking about the authenticity of various haunted objects. So after viewing the house and realizing that it had almost everything that we were looking for, we managed to convince ourselves that living next to such a strange, creepy building could actually be pretty cool. And to be fair, sometimes it actually is. Other times, however, it very much isn't. Our house, at 109 years old, is definitely up there in age, but its interior was fully renovated a couple of decades before we moved in. So despite its mildly gothic exterior of gray, faded stone, arched windows, and sharp, multi-pointed roof, the inside is actually mostly semi-modern. All of the surrounding houses, including the funeral home, are even older than and are of a similar build to ours, and we quite frankly love the aesthetic that it gives the entire block. Autumns feel especially cozy, and the natural spookiness that our neighborhood exudes lends itself to making Halloween especially fun for the kids, as well as any horror enthusiasts like my wife and me who happen to live in the area. Most of the time we appreciate the overall vibe, but it certainly makes things even more eerie when our guests pay their unexpected visits. Mr. Grayson, the owner and director of the funeral home, is a slightly strange, albeit decent enough guy. He, similar to his home, is getting up there in years, evidenced by his stark gray hair and wrinkly, pale skin, but judging by the naked ring finger on his left hand, he does not appear to be married, nor to even have anybody else living in the home with him. He mostly keeps to himself, but he came by about a week after we had moved in to introduce himself to us. After exchanging pleasantries and partaking in a brief conversation, he steered the conversation to the business of his business. He said he hoped that living next to a funeral home wouldn't bother us much, and that the positioning of the two houses would allow us to keep our privacy even when he hosted services. He told us that he didn't provide cremations, that he preferred to do things the old school way, whatever that meant. So we wouldn't have to worry about any unpleasant smells, and while he had a small parking lot attached to his property, often cars would wind up spilling out along the street, but service goers usually parked on the curb in front of his building, and only rarely ventured into the space in front of our house. We thanked him for the heads up, and said that it was nice to meet him. He turned to go, but he only made it to the middle step of our front porch before he turned back. One more thing that I forgot to mention, he said. You may notice that my clients tend to wander. At times, they may briefly wander onto your property. You needn't worry. They won't harm you, and they will listen to you if you tell them to move on. I just thought I should forewarn you now before you find yourself positively spooked for no good reason." He turned to leave again before we could respond. "Well, have a pleasant rest of your day. And don't be a stranger, you hear? We'd love to have you over for dinner, so we can welcome you to the neighborhood." He shuffled down our porch steps and made his way back to his home, disappearing inside and largely removing himself from our lives. Neither of us were particularly interested in his dinner invitation, and we doubted that he was either. Pleasantries and all that. At the time, we didn't think much of Mr. Grayson's final warning. We assumed that when he said clients, he was talking about disoriented mourners who sometimes wound up where they didn't belong. We doubted that it would be a big deal, and so promptly forgot about it after a brief discussion about the strangeness of the whole encounter. The first incident didn't come until close to a month later. By then, we had largely forgotten about Mr. Grayson and his cryptic words of caution. We rarely even saw the funeral director outside of the occasional glimpse of him on his grandiose front porch welcoming mourners on service days. And the stress of the move had our minds very far away from our first interaction with the peculiar man. It happened on a night in late spring, one of those hot, sweltering days that feel more like early summer despite what the calendar would have you believe. I woke up in the middle of the night desperately needing to pee, and seeing as our bedroom had never had a master bathroom installed during any of the house's renovations, I was forced to walk out of our room and all the way down the long hallway to the lone second-floor bathroom on the far end, hoping that my tired, lumbering footsteps didn't wake my light sleeper of a wife. I didn't turn the light on in the bathroom, so by the time I reached the toilet, did my business, and stepped back into the hallway, my eyes had properly adjusted to the darkness that enveloped me. Had I turned on the light, thus resetting my night vision, I might not have even noticed the little girl standing at the top of the staircase. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old. The first thing I noticed about her was that she was wearing a pink polka dot bathing suit, which immediately struck me as odd for that time of night. The second was that she was positively soaking wet, her small frame weighed down by a heavy curtain of water that gave her clammy skin an unnatural shine, and which forced her chestnut hair to cling to her little skull like a thin sheet of plastic wrap. She stood staring at me from the shadows of the nighttime gloom, as still as death, while droplets of water fell from her swimsuit and weakly splashed against the hardwood floor at her feet. I immediately picked up on the overpowering scent of chlorine. Had this occurred only a few years later, I may have thought she was my own daughter looking back at me from the shadows, but seeing as we did not yet have any children at the time of this incident, the girl's presence completely baffled me. She stared at me with her pair of glassy, distant eyes for a few long seconds before I managed to chase away the surprise that kept me frozen in place. "Are you all right, little girl?" I asked her. No response. Are you lost? Silence. "Where are your parents?" For several moments, I thought she wasn't going to speak, until finally she found her words. I don't know." Her voice was quiet, barely above a whisper, and while she was looking in my direction, I realized that she was not staring at me, but at a point behind me, as if I were not there at all. "What's your name?" I asked her, but before I could get a response, I heard the sound of my wife shuffling out into the hallway. When she saw me, frozen stiff in the nighttime gloom, she frowned. "Who are you talking to?" she asked in her groggy, half-asleep voice. "And why does it smell like a pool out here?" "This little girl must be lost," I said. "She says she doesn't know." In the brief moment that I had turned to look at my wife, the girl had disappeared. For a while I stood completely still in the hallway, dumbfounded, at a loss for words. I may have convinced myself that I had imagined the entire encounter in my tired, sleep-deprived mind were it not for the pungent puddle of chlorinated water that still rested at the top of the stairs. We immediately called 911, not because we were frightened of the little girl being somewhere in our house, but because we were concerned about her well-being. The police arrived fairly quickly, all things considered, and after asking a number of questions that I answered with varying degrees of confidence, they did a surprisingly curt search of our home that turned up no results. The girl was gone. Were it not for the puddle that she had left behind, I couldn't have said for sure if she had even existed at all. I was stunned when one of the officers told me that while they would file a police report, There was nothing more they could do. Nothing more you can do, I said. But there's a lost little girl around here somewhere. You aren't even going to ask around the neighborhood about her or something. The officer, looking like he had a lot to say, seemed to weigh his words before he finally sighed and spoke. Look, you just moved into this place recently, right? Which means you probably don't know this yet. But this isn't the first call of this type that we've had at this residence. Not by a long shot. What? You mean like that girl has been here before? Not exactly, the officer said. People tend to see strange things in this house. Things that aren't necessarily there. But she left a puddle at the top of my stairs. I said, flabbergasted. It's still sitting up there right now. You're telling me I imagined that. No, he said. In fact, I'm sure you saw something, but I don't know that it's exactly what you might be thinking. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully again. Look, you're the lieutenant's nephew, right? I think it's probably more his place to explain this to you. Give him a call tomorrow morning, and he'll give you the skinny on this house. But in the meantime, rest easy tonight knowing that there is no lost little girl in a polka dot bathing suit wandering around this neighborhood. Of that, I can assure you. His words were not at all reassuring. The police left, and after cleaning up the puddle of water that was soaking into the hardwood of the upstairs landing, my wife and I went back to bed. My mind was too preoccupied by the thought of the lost little girl to fall back to sleep. So when morning came, I groggily crawled out of bed and followed that officer's advice. My uncle is, at the time of writing this, a nearly 3-decade veteran of my town's police department. He's seen it all throughout the course of his career, including apparently personally going on several calls to my house back in the day, and so when I called him asking about the previous night's incident, he immediately knew what I was talking about. Jeez, he said from the other end of the line. I didn't realize that you had moved into that house. If I had, I probably would have told you to steer clear of it before you signed anything that was legally binding. I frowned at this, despite knowing that he couldn't see it. Why? What exactly is wrong with our new house? My uncle waited a long time before answering. So long that I actually thought he had hung up on me or we had otherwise lost connection before he finally spoke again. There is some weird stuff that happens at that house, kid. I've already gathered as much, I said, try my best to check my annoyance while speaking to my uncle. What I don't understand yet is what exactly that means. Again, there was an uncomfortably long pause. Let me start by telling you this. The reason that officer last night knew that the little girl in the polka dot bathing suit wasn't wandering around your neighborhood is because he knew that she had died earlier this week. I can still remember the chill that ran up my spine when my uncle told me this. The invisible line that connected our two phones suddenly felt very heavy and only grew more dense with each passing moment of silence that followed. I knew that I needed to speak if I wanted to alleviate some of that weight, and exasperated, what was all I could muster. Yeah, he said, sounding sorry to have to be the one to tell me this. She drowned during her swim lessons over the weekend. All of the adults in the pool were distracted with other students. And well, did you know that a person can drown in less than 30 seconds? I hardly even heard my uncle's drowning fact. For a few seconds, I didn't even know what to say. But how is that possible when I just saw her here last night? Without looking into it, I'm willing to bet she wound up at the funeral home next to your house. What makes you say that? Because the clients at that funeral home, they don't like to stay in the funeral home. I can't tell you how many calls we've gotten over the years of new homeowners seeing mysterious figures and uninvited guests in that house of yours. And each time we looked into it, we've learned that the guests in question match the description of recent arrivals at Grayson Funeral Home. What? You mean like they're ghosts? I said, you're not telling me the entire police department believes that, are you? It's hard not to believe it with how many times it's happened, he said. The facts don't lie, and all I'm doing is telling you the facts. I took a few moments to absorb this. Okay, so assuming I believe you, what are we supposed to do now? Just live our lives in this house, never knowing the next time we're going to see another one of these visitors? There's a reason so many people have moved in and out of that place over the years. My uncle said, living with ghosts certainly isn't for everybody, but you shouldn't be in any sort of danger. As far as I know, the visitors don't seem to mean any harm. They're merely lost, confused, not yet able to accept that they've died. A little push in the right direction usually sees them on their way. Usually, some of them might be a little more stubborn than others. We've definitely gotten calls about the same figures appearing over and over again in that house. But again, they don't mean any harm. They just might inadvertently give you a fright every now and again. Right, like how that girl last night would have made me piss my pants had I not already taken care of my bladder a few moments beforehand. I wanted to say, instead I thanked him for being a big help. "No problem, buddy," he said. "And if you ever have any questions about the people you see, just give me a call. I might be able to dig something up about them that will set your mind at ease." While I very much doubted that last statement, I appreciated my uncle's offer anyway. I didn't realize it at the time, but I would wind up relying on his insight a lot more than I ever would have expected. I told my wife what my uncle had told me, being a paranormal buff. She was immediately accepting of the news, if not a little put off by it. She even seemed a little bit jealous that I had been the only one to see the girl. The only evidence she had of the spirit's existence was a chlorinated puddle of water that had been left behind. She half-joked that she hoped she'd be the next one to see something paranormal, and acted as if that was for my sake, so she could carry some of the burden that our now home had bestowed upon us. It wouldn't be long before she regretted this wish. About 2 weeks passed without incident. We settled back into our home with the new knowledge that my uncle had given us. On the outside, not much had changed, but I could tell that we were both thinking about the little girl in the polka dot bathing suit more than either of us wanted to admit. We talked about her a handful of times in those 2 weeks, more about who we thought she was in life than about our brief experience with her in death. The more we thought about her, the more upset we became over the tragic end of the little girl that we had never met and had not even known the name of. Eventually, she would fade into the background, becoming just another number in the vast collection of visitors that we would gather throughout all of our years in this house. But for the time being, her presence was very much felt, and it felt incredibly raw. We could understand why so many people had moved out of this house throughout the decades. Even as paranormal enthusiasts, the weight of what we had experienced was significant, and we could only imagine how heavy it felt for others who wanted nothing to do with the ghostly interlopers that regularly found their way onto our property. And all of this was after only a single experience. But there were certainly many more to come. At the expiration of those 2 weeks, I heard my wife scream. I was cooking pasta in the kitchen, the hot pot in my mid-hands headed toward the strainer in the sink, when her terrified screech stabbed to the house like a stiletto, so shrill and horrific that I nearly scalded myself with the boiling water. I placed the pot back on the stove with as much haste as I dared to and rushed toward the sound of her voice, calling her name and asking her if she was all right as I went. I found her in the second-floor bathroom, sitting curled up in the tub and sobbing so hard that I thought she was going to cause herself to asphyxiate right there beneath the dripping faucet. After crawling into the tub with her and comforting her for a minute or so, I managed to get her calm enough that she could tell me what had forced her into such a state. She had been cleaning the bathroom sink. Her eyes focused on the bowl as she went down with her trusty scrub brush, when she happened to look up into the mirror. Standing behind her, staring into the mirror, was a shirtless middle-aged man, his face caked in a sickening mixture of shaving cream and blood. More of the red-hot liquid spurted from a deep, long wound in his throat, and she swore she could feel the blood sticky warm splashing against the back of her neck. When she turned around, he was already gone, but that didn't stop the banshee-like shriek from forcing its way out of her. She didn't remember climbing into the bathtub, but she must have raced toward it with primal expedience, where she then coiled up in fear until I arrived. We stayed in the tub for a long time after that, while she battled with her lungs to regain control of her breathing. Eventually, I helped her shaking, weak form climb out of the tub and walked her to our bedroom, where she rested for a while afterwards. No longer in the mood to eat, I threw my pots in the trash and returned to the bathroom, where I finished her chores for her. While cleaning the sink, I noticed a small splotch of white shaving cream smeared upon the counter, which I promptly wiped away. I somehow managed to convince myself that it had been my own shaving cream, despite the fact that I had been growing a beard at the time and hadn't used the stuff in months. I reluctantly asked my uncle about this incident, and what he told me disturbed me enough that I decided I would not repeat it to my wife unless she asked me about it. To this day, She never has. My uncle told me that the man in question had recently been murdered by his wife. She had come up behind him while he was shaving, one of his old-school double-edged razor blades hidden in her hand. She sliced open his throat before he even had a chance to realize what was happening. Now, she was sitting in a local jail while he was in the funeral home next door, waiting to be put to rest by his confused and devastated family. At the time, his wife had not provided a motive for murder, and I never followed up with my uncle about it. I didn't see much good in knowing. Naturally, we discussed moving out after this. Oddly enough, my wife was the one who was more intent on staying in the house, despite her experience being significantly worse than mine was. "We've made a commitment to this house," she said, "and we're going to stick to it. There's no way we can let this place beat us that easily." She forced a smile. "Besides," both Mr. Grayson and your uncle said, "we don't have anything to worry about with these visitors. It's not like they can hurt us or anything." "Yeah," I said, "but they can scare you so badly that you wind up hiding in the bathtub." I was more surprised than anything else. I'm sure I won't react nearly that badly next time. My wife placed a reassuring hand on my forearm. "You don't need to worry about me. I'll be all right." "Are you sure?" I asked, unconvinced. She nodded. "Yeah, I can handle a few scares here and there if you can." I finally gave a smile back to her. It was mostly genuine. "Of course I can. It's going to take more than a few unexpected guests to scare me out of this place." And so we were in agreement, and the matter was settled. Years passed in that house. We raised a family together, a pair of beautiful daughters that became our entire world. All the while, we continued to be inconvenienced by our regular visitors. Sometimes weeks would go by where nothing paranormal happened, but other times we'd both have experiences for multiple days in a row. As it turned out, my wife had been right. She had never had as bad of a reaction as the one after her first incident. Some ghostly encounters were worse than others, but never once had we ever felt threatened by any of the presences in our home, or at least not for a while. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. We eventually mustered the bravery to do as Mr. Grayson and my uncle had told us to, and encouraged any guests we encountered to leave. Like my uncle said, there were a few that ignored our urges and stuck around for a while after we had spoken to them, but most of them didn't put up a fight. The good ones did as we instructed, usually disappearing with such little fuss that it often took us a little while to even realize that they had left. As our two daughters grew up, we taught them how to deal with the apparitions they encountered, and soon they would even begin telling us stories about the ghosts they vanquished throughout the house. My youngest once encountered an elderly woman in our garden when she was gathering peppers for her mother, and on the same day our oldest came across a young boy around her age while she was pulling her bike out of the shed. Both of them encouraged the interlopers to move on, and both guests had listened without any complaint. I was oddly proud of my girls. It felt as if they had taken up the mantle of some old family tradition, and were following in the well-trodden footsteps of their ancestors before them. Their experiences at home made them tough and difficult to frighten, and they eventually became minor celebrities at their school. Kids started coming over wanting to have paranormal experiences, and a few of them even did, or so they said. I suppose I'll never really know if they were being honest about their encounters, or if they were simply making up stories to tell their friends on the playground. But I guess it doesn't really matter. Not every visitor was a result of a recent death. As I said before, the funeral home is quite old, and some of its patrons over the decades and even centuries have chosen to stick around for much longer than they ever should have. Once I was working under the hood of my car in the garage when I suddenly smelled cigarette smoke. I looked up and saw a man standing in front of my workbench, a lit cigarette drooping lazily in his mouth. He wore a white t-shirt tucked into a pair of dark blue jeans, which were themselves cuffed over top his pair of worn work boots. His black hair was sturdily slicked back and held in place with what looked to be a strong pomade, and was so dark and shiny that it was difficult to make out the thick layer of blood that caked the crown of his head. He was studying the bench, his arms planted against its surface, his profile facing me. "Looking for something?" I asked. He didn't turn to look at me when he responded. "You seen the monkey wrench, boss?" "No," I said, "and I think you ought to leave." "Oh," he said. "Right then." I returned my attention to my car, and when I looked in his direction again, he was gone. The smell of his burning cigarette lingered in the garage for the rest of the afternoon. There was a time one summer when my wife and I had some of our college friends over for a cookout. We had warned them that they might encounter one of our regular guests during their visit, but they all laughed it off and didn't think much of it. At night, we spent a few hours around a campfire in our backyard swapping stories, playing games, and just generally enjoying each other's company. The group initially consisted of 5 of us, my wife and me, along with our 3 friends. But at a point that I could not, and I still cannot discern, our number increased to 6. My wife was the first to notice him sitting in an empty space between 2 of our friends, and she subtly drew everybody's attention to him. In the uneven light of the guttering fire, we could see his messy brown beard and matching hair beneath his brimmed hardy hat, as well as the Prussian blue jacket that adorned his upper body. I saw rather quickly that the area around his abdomen was significantly darker than the rest of his upper body, and in the light of the flame, I could just barely make out that the jacket had been torn to shreds there. Our friends, too frightened to move, could only watch as a man in blue sitting between them leaned forward, pulled a metal flask from his hip, and began to drink. The scent of whiskey cut through the burn of the campfire and drifted on the nighttime summer air as he drank. And in a few moments the liquor that found its way to his stomach came pouring out of the tattered hole in his coat. The blue man slowly turned his head toward our friend, seeming to notice her for the first time. He raised the flask in his hand, presenting it to her. Care for some? Our friend, despite our earlier warning, was too petrified to respond, and so my wife spoke in her place. No, thank you, and I think it best that you move on. The blue man capped his flask, then followed up with a lethargic tip of his hat directed at nobody in particular. All right. He went silent and turned his attention to the fire. The living members of our group did our best to carry on with the conversation, as if he wasn't there, and eventually one of us noticed that our number had once again been reduced to 5. But the smell of whiskey remained for some time, and an inspection of the ground near where the blue man sat revealed that the dirt was wet with the jettisoned contents of his ruined stomach. Our friends stopped making fun of our ghost stories after that. None of them have visited our home since then. Considering the age of the funeral home, I didn't think we'd ever have a guest that was older than the blue man, so you can imagine my surprise and confusion when only a few months later I encountered a Roman centurion with a bruised, swollen forehead in our basement. More baffling still was the fact that he spoke to me in English and understood me when I told him it was time for him to leave. Everything made a lot more sense when my uncle informed me that an especially intoxicated man had recently fallen to his death from a 4th-floor balcony during a Halloween party. He had apparently hit his head pretty hard when he landed. It is important to reiterate that all the visitors mentioned up to this point never made any of us feel unsafe outside of the occasional initial reaction of surprise or fright. And even then, the occurrences became so frequent that we weren't even startled by our guests half the time anymore. Any fear instilled in us faded not long after the visitors left, and the only returning guests we've had are the ones we failed to make leave during our first few encounters with them. But even these have all eventually passed on just the same as their predecessors had. This is all to say that not once have we ever experienced a presence in our home that we have not been able to handle, at least not until that night. It happened in winter after our oldest daughter's first birthday. My wife had to stay late at work, which wasn't unheard of, especially back in those days. On nights like those, I'd handle getting our 1-year-old settled into bed before drifting off to sleep myself shortly after. But I'd always leave a few lights on for when my wife got home, one of them being the wall lamp in the upstairs hallway. I had just gotten our daughter to fall asleep and was in our bedroom, reading a book in bed while preparing to hit the hay, when I happened to look toward the open bedroom door and saw the apparition standing there. She was a little girl, similar in age to that first spirit I had seen standing at the top of the stairs all those years ago. Immediately upon seeing her, I knew that something was wrong. Her presence brought with it a disturbing chill that was uncharacteristic of any other spirits we'd encountered up to that point. Plenty of them had come with strange feelings or auras that sometimes manipulated the temperatures in the room, but none of them had ever had this level of intensity to them. It made all the hairs on my body stand up as if they had suddenly been frozen into an army of needling icicles. As we stared at each other, her in the doorway and me in the bed, I felt an overwhelming sense of terror latch onto me that I had never experienced before, and hopefully will never experience again The hallway behind her was black with an almighty darkness, which I knew should not have been possible, since I had left the light on for my wife, and I had seen its soft glow streaming into the room out of the corner of my eye while I was reading my book. As I noticed this powerful umbra, I realized that the overwhelming energy I felt was not coming from the girl, but rather from the presence that existed in the space beyond which light could reach. And as the understanding of a fresh, terrible danger continued to bubble up within me, something happened that stood in complete contrast to every ghostly encounter that I had experienced up to that point. The girl was the one to tell me that she needed to leave, and I knew that I needed to stop her from doing so. Something in my gut told me that whatever presence existed in the void beyond the doorway was beckoning for the girl to come to it, and I knew that I couldn't allow that to happen. I knew that for her to listen to that dreadful umbra would only result in her eternal doom. I was the only thing that stood between her and the certain damnation that awaited her just beyond the edge of that cataclysmic precipice. "No, I think you should stay here for a while," I said to her, sitting up in my bed. I planted my bare feet on the chilly hardwood floor. Its cold touch steeled my nerves and fought back the cacophony of voices in my mind that screamed for me to let her leave. Let the umbra have her just so long as it would leave me alone. She seemed confused, or at least as confused as a ghost could be. "Are you sure? I really think I should leave now." Her voice sounded small, distant, and vulnerable, which only made me all the more protective of her. "I'm sure," I said. "Stay in this house for a bit, okay? You can even go play in my daughter's room for a little while. You'll like it in there. It's cozy with lots of toys and big, soft pillows." "I don't know," she said, turning to look through the doorway toward the darkness. "My friend says he's going to take me to my parents. He says they're looking for me." "Don't listen to him," I said. "He's a stranger. You shouldn't talk to strangers." She paused, as if hearing somebody speak. "He says that you're a stranger." "I know your parents," I said. It felt wrong to lie to her like that, but I knew I had to do anything I could to stop her from going with the presence in the hallway. "They'll come to get you soon, but you have to stay here, okay?" The girl remained silent for a long time, while I barely so much as breathed from my spot on the bed. The room grew heavier, darker, and I found that my lungs soon struggled to take in air, as if they were freshly recovering from running a marathon. My forehead grew slick with sweat despite the chill that infested the room. My body began to burn and ache. Paradoxically, rather than escape the heat, I felt the almost uncontrollable need to crawl beneath the warm, safe covers and hide from the powerful umbra that seemed to be slowly sweeping into the room in the form of long, black, shadowy tendrils. I suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of defeat. I feared that the girl was going to follow the presence, and that she would quickly be lost to the unending darkness that so sweetly coaxed her from such an agonizingly short distance away. But soon I noticed that the dark presence was beginning to recede, until finally the light in the hallway was able to once again pierce through the weakening gloom. The terrible chill fled from the room, and the dense miasma that had been suffocating me and draining the very will to live from my bones faded back into light, breathable air. "Okay," she said. "I'll stay." "Good," I said. "And let me know if he tries to talk to you again, okay?" "Okay," she said again. The girl stood staring at me for a spell, while my nerves continued to strum all along my anxious body like a mass of broken guitar strings. Reaching a shaking hand toward my nightstand, I picked up my book and forced myself to return to my reading in an attempt to calm myself down. When my body was once again my own, I looked back at the doorway. The girl was gone, and gentle lamplight bled in from the hall. Strangely enough, I was no longer worried for her. I somehow understood that whatever presence had wanted her had been thwarted that night, and that she was safe for the time being. This truth was confirmed to me when I saw her again a few weeks later, and, with the umbratic presence absent, I finally told her that it was time for her to move on. When she vanished for the last time, I felt an inexplicable peace overwhelm me, and I started to cry. To this day, I don't know the extent of what the Umbra wanted with the girl, but I know now as I did back then that its intentions were nothing short of sinister. I still wonder what caused that presence to specifically latch onto her instead of the countless other souls that drifted through our home, but I could never muster the courage to research the entity or ask my uncle for more details about the girl's death. I debated not even telling my wife about this encounter, but ultimately decided that she needed to know. I stayed up until she got home that night, much to her confusion, and immediately told her what had happened. She remained quiet for a long while after that. Neither of us slept that night. It has been the better part of 2 decades since that incident. My youngest daughter just started high school, and my uncle retired from the police service going on 5 years ago now. Mr. Grayson still holds his funeral services next door. I saw him outside, welcoming mourners just last week. And I try not to think about the fact that the old man looks like he hasn't aged a day since I met him. Countless guests have come and gone in the years since that terrible night. But that dark presence has not returned. I don't know if it ever will. And I pray to God that I never have to feel what I felt that night again. More than that, though, I pray that my wife and daughters never have to experience what I went through on that night. If that shadow decides to show itself again, I just ask that it does so to me and to me alone, because I'll be here waiting for it. Should it ever choose to make itself known, I already know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life in this house. Ghosts and all. If they couldn't scare me away in those first few months, then they're stuck with me until the time comes that I join their ranks on the other side of that thin, translucent veil that we call death. And who knows, maybe I'll wind up in the funeral home next door when my time finally comes, and I'll have the chance to pay this old house one last visit before I say goodbye. Story 2. Did you see the paper today? Mark asked me excitedly. I had total lunar eclipse this Friday. His perverse excitement irked me, but I had known he'd always been fascinated by it throughout our marriage. I talked to Steve about it today, he said, lowering his voice as if savoring the words. He told me they've known for a while, astrological calendar or something. Steve's been tracking it at the station. Had someone at the school told you? Yes, I lied. You should have told me. His irritation sharpened, then softened into something almost gleeful. After a beat of silence, he asked, "How many do you think he'll kill this year?" I drew a breath, forcing myself to steady the irritation in my voice. "I don't know, Mark. You know, I don't like to talk about it." But the numbers clawed their way back unbidden. Everyone in town knew them. Tuesday, July 6, 1982, 1 killed. Thursday, December 30th, that same year, 1 more. Thursday, August 17th, 1989, 4. Wednesday, December 9th, 1992, another 4. Monday, November 29th, 1993, 4 again. And just this spring, Wednesday, April 3rd, 1996, 6 gone. 20 bodies in Amherst. No, I did not like to think about it. More than last time, I'd imagine. I said it last, if only to placate him. "Honey!" Mark's voice lifted with a strange, eager brightness. "Steve says they're certain they'll catch him this time." It wasn't the first time the police thought they were closing in on their killer. They've said that before. I reminded him. "I know." Mark rushed, excitement rising. "But Steve, he couldn't give me details, cop stuff, but he swears it's different this time." Steve was a good man and meant well for a cop, but half the time, he didn't know his ass from his elbow. "I hope he's right," I said, though I didn't believe it. The first killing had shaken the town to its core. Wednesday, July 7th. An early morning jogger stumbled across the mangled body of Michael Strong, a 16-year-old delinquent, along the banks of Puffer's Pond. His throat had been slashed so deep his head was nearly severed. The sheer brutality suggested someone who knew him. One of his mother's revolving boyfriends was hauled in, questioned, and just as quickly cut loose. The town was buzzing that summer, the summer after Mark and I graduated. Our relationship had only just begun. He'd been terrified I'd meet someone else at school that fall. Then the murder happened, and he was horrified, yet unable to look away. After all, his younger brother had gone to school with Michael Strong. Me too. Really want to see the monster who could be doing this. He paused. "The bus is here. Tell Shar I love her." "Will do. Love you. Love you too. I'll see you tonight." It was hard to believe Sharon was already 7. August 2nd, 1989. Still the hardest day of my life. 9 hours of labor. each contraction a tidal wave tearing through me. I remember clutching Mark's hand so tightly my nails left crescents in his skin, his voice steadying me through the pain. And then, at last, her cries split the air, sharp, fierce, alive. The nurse laid her on my chest, warm and squirming, and Mark's eyes brimmed with tears, as if he'd never seen anything so perfect. Mark had always wanted a baby. I made him wait. First my undergraduate, then my master's. We married in the middle. His plumbing jobs keeping us afloat while I scraped for lab grants that always came too late. When I finally told him we could try, the joy in his face was something I'll never forget. And Sharon, our Sharon, was the greatest gift we'd ever been given, just over 2 weeks later. For students were butchered on campus. August 17, 1989, the night of freshman orientation. Someone had slipped through an unlocked window on the first floor of Baker House, in and out, quick as a shadow. The girls, Lisa Rathbone, Shannon Armstrong, Tracy Lloyd, and Denise DeWick, had left the latch undone. It was enough. The killer started with Lisa and Denise, crushing their skulls with a hammer before the others even stirred. By the time Shannon and Tracy woke to the sound of hammers squelching brain, it was already too late. Their screams tore through the dorm, echoing down the hallways. But the orientation chaos and the lunar eclipse that had drawn so many students outside kept help from coming. By the time anyone forced the door, the room was a slaughterhouse. Lisa and Denise lay unrecognizable. Shannon wasn't in much better of a state. Tracy was still alive, barely, her body twitching as she slipped into a coma she would never wake from. Mark was horrified. And me. If it hadn't been for the pregnancy, I might have been there that night, working. That was the first time anyone began whispering about the pattern, how it might not be a coincidence at all. Michael Strong's murder, and then Chelsea Murphy's at December, had rattled the town. Both were brutal, senseless killings in a place that prided itself on safety. But they were treated as isolated tragedies, the kind of horror that struck once a generation. No one, at least not openly, spoke of the fact that both deaths had fallen on nights of a lunar eclipse. Mark would later claim that after Murphy's murder, he knew the killer only struck beneath an eclipse. But I knew he was lying. He hadn't seen it. I had. I recognized it immediately, though I never told him. To his credit, after the second murder, he was quick to call it what it was, a serial killer. It was the early 80s, though, and every brutal crime was a serial killer's work, until months passed, then years, and the fear dulled. Even Mark let it slip from his mind. Until 89, then everything shifted. I rolled my chair back, opened the bottom drawer of my file cabinet, and the astrological calendar peered up at me. Friday, September 27th. The paper smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. The corners softened from years of being thumbed. It hadn't been a coincidence that Michael Strong and Chelsea Murphy were killed under lunar eclipses. Full eclipses that crossed over Amherst coincided with killings. Eclipses that missed the town did not. Partial eclipses produced nothing. For a while, I let doubt creep in. Maybe I'd been seeing patterns where none existed. Then Baker House. And now, September 27th glared back at me from the calendar, heavy as an omen. That old feeling twisted, stirring in my stomach. I swallowed hard, trying to push it down and to steady myself. 89 had been the year I began my doctorate, and the year panic swept the university. Security patrols doubled, curfews were enforced, and dorm windows were nailed shut. The campus they called the zoo fell silent. Thank God for our parents, whose babysitting let me return to lab, and for Mark, by then a newly minted master plumber, who threw himself into work. When the school year ended without another attack, a memorial plaque was set in the ground outside Baker Hall. By the following year, the speeches grew shorter, the vigil crowd smaller, the memories dimmer. And by December 1992, the murders had been all but forgotten. By then, I was teaching 100 level classes to rooms of glassy-eyed underclassmen. Finals were looming, the holidays hung in the air, and even after a lifetime in this town, the sight of it dressed for Christmas could still coax a smile from me. Yes, even that December. The bricks glowed warm against the cold, lanterns burned in the town center, and campus lawns sprouted Christmas trees and snowmen. We'd only been in our first house since February, but Mark made that first Christmas there feel enchanted. It was a kind of calm that settles in just before January, and February buried the town beneath snowdrifts higher than windows. The wind cutting sharp at 10 below. My students, out-of-staters, internationals, and Eastern Mass kids alike chattered with wide-eyed excitement about the coming lunar eclipse, calling it a Christmas miracle. I smiled and let them. I didn't have the heart to tell them what it really meant. I was grateful that none of my students were killed. None from the university at all. Wednesday, December 9th. Four Amherst College students have been laughing amidst a snowball fight on East Drive when the shooter struck. Jamal Naver, Elizabeth Hawkins, and Dorothy Freeman went down instantly, gunned down with precision no amateur could manage. Jacob Donnelly ran. The shooter clipped his shoulder, dropped him in the snow, and while he begged and pleaded, put a final round in his head, execution style. It had stopped snowing earlier that afternoon. Steve, by then on the force, told Mark that if the flakes had kept falling, they might have been able to track the tires. Horseshit, if you ask me. Steve was working a desk, not homicide. What they did have were 7 shell casings, all .45s from a Colt M1911. The manhunt exploded. The press gave the killer a name, the Blood Moon Killer. I don't know who coined it, but it stuck, spreading like wildfire. Police began dragging in every Amherst resident who owned a .45, interrogating veterans, burning through leads. And then, just after New Year's, the whole of UMass reeled when Professor Ian Lowe was arrested. A veteran, his service pistol conveniently missing, his wife refusing to confirm his alibi. Mark was stunned. We'd eaten dinner at Lowe's house just weeks before, over Thanksgiving. He tried to save face by insisting Lowe had always rubbed him the wrong way. Attractive men often did. The trial began that June, a full-blown circus. Reporters flooded Hampshire District Court. Western Mass had never seen anything like it. The police, the prosecution, the whole community believed they had their man. Lowe had lived in Amherst since '78. He was large, fit, a veteran. His gun was gone. He couldn't explain that away. They tried to tie all 10 murders to him. The details that didn't fit, that he wasn't in Amherst on July 6, 1982, that he couldn't possibly have squeezed through Baker House's window, were conveniently left unspoken. I still remember the broadcast in September. Sharon was playing with Mark on the carpet as I watched the news. The defense had introduced a new witness, graduate student Kelly Horan. I knew her. I knew about her relationship with Lowe. I knew about his relationships with TAs, with staff, with anyone who batted an eye's way. It didn't take long before the prosecution's case started a fray. But as November neared and the next anticipated lunar eclipse approached, the town held its breath. One way or another, we would find out whether the Blood Moon Killer was already in custody or still at large. Monday, November 29th, 1993. The moon had darkened to the deepest shade I had ever seen. Blood moon is a misnomer. It is usually a dull orange, but that night it was nearly red, glowing like a burning coal as I drove home beneath it. People said the eclipse lasted an hour. In truth, it was 46.7 minutes. When I walked in, Mark told me the news. For more dead. 2 students have been killed just off the north of campus near Fairfield Street. Out under the sky, watching the moon, Riley Tompkins and Sarah Jacobs. Riley had taken a knife to the back of her throat, the blade driven deep enough to push through where her Adam's apple had been. Sarah had made an awful scream as she ran, but she was silenced by a single round from a Colt .45. The bullet punching just at the juncture of neck and shoulder, tearing through muscle, artery, and bone. It should have killed her. It did not. The killer finished the work by stomping her skull. A neighbor, 56-year-old Ken Williams, had heard the shot and stepped outside with his own revolver, hoping to help. Instead, he came upon the killer scraping brain matter from the soles of their boots on the curb. Ken took a single shot above the left eye. He dropped instantly. The killer then drifted back toward the university. Graduate student Lee Shio had just left the life sciences lab. He did not run. He took a bullet to the chest, dropped where he stood, and never rose again. Mark had been horrified. How could he not? I worked right there. I was horrified, too, though for a different reason. I had known Licio. He had been an exceptional student, quiet, precise, courteous, his work in the lab meticulous. Professor Lowe was released soon after. His marriage dissolved, and he moved far from Amherst. The town barely whispered his name again. Steve told Mark the rest one night, over beers at our kitchen table, while I strained my ears from the other room. The CCTV footage had caught a little, but not enough. Licio pausing outside the Life Sciences building, waving at someone off camera, then lowering his hand in confusion a split second before the shot punched through his chest. Steve admitted that he believed the killer was a student. There had been no real suspects, no trail to follow, just a body on the pavement, a half-wave frozen in time, and a single .45 shell left behind. In a move that shocked everyone, the university shut its doors and sent students and faculty home. The press tore them apart for it. After all, hadn't it become obvious by then that the killer only struck under eclipses? Sending everyone away was little more than theater. Worse, the police signed off on the decision before realizing they might have just delivered the killer back to whatever hometown he'd come from. Everyone could see it. They were desperate, grasping at straws, as lost as the rest of us. Mark, meanwhile, was transfixed, awestruck, horrified, fascinated, as if he couldn't look away from the fire even while it consumed everything around it. I was left with something else. The same hollow aftermath that always followed. A pounding headache, sharp and sour like a hangover. A creeping numbness that dulled the edges of thought. And beneath it all, the crushing futility of knowing it would happen again. After those 4 deaths, the town's frenzy dulled. The headlines shrank. The nightly news moved on. And the chatter in grocery store aisles faded to silence. The case went cold. Another unsolved, not consigned to rumor. The university, eager to wash its hands, erected yet another plaque. This one just off Governor's Drive, for the 3 students lost. No mention of Ken Williams. A middle-aged man didn't carry the same weight as students with futures ahead of them. His name slipped into silence, a footnote, if even that. Months without an eclipse bled into years. Sharon started school, and life found its strange rhythm again. My career in academia began to gather momentum just as Mark's plumbing business took off. We built a life that looked, from the outside, almost enviable. A neat house, steady work, laughter at the dinner table. Mark longed for another child, a son, he said, to balance the scales. I managed to talk him out of it, sheltering behind the excuse of my career. Grants, research, conferences. I told him I needed time, but the truth was simpler and far darker. I couldn't imagine bringing another child into a world where the air itself seemed haunted, where shadows returned every time the moon burned red. One child was enough. One was already too much to risk. Nearly 3 whole years slipped by. We had moved into a larger, prettier house on Pine Hollow. Ironically, just down the road from where Michael Strong had been butchered years before. The neighborhood near Puffer's Pond was quiet now, scrubbed clean of memory, though I could never quite forget. I buried myself in work, papers, and lectures piling one on top of another, until March crept in almost unnoticed. It was then that the familiar sensation returned, settling into me with a weight I could neither shake nor name. It began in the gut, a hollow gnawing. Not pain exactly, but an emptiness. My skin felt restless, my blood quickened, my thoughts turned jagged. I had learned to recognize it over the years, though no explanation ever followed. It was always the same, a slow, ravenous stirring that left me uneasy in my own body, as though I had been hollowed out and replaced with something that craved more than I could ever give. Wednesday, April 3rd, brought with it a flicker of hope. The eclipse that day would pass unseen, swallowed by the afternoon sky, and some whisper that perhaps this time Amherst would be spared. But hope, like every other illusion, dissolved quickly. Police and National Guard patrolled in droves, posted on every corner, and clustered in pairs across campus. Hell, across the town. Their presence was loud, visible, meant to reassure, and yet it left blind spots large enough for a body to slip right through. The killer did just that. They walked unnoticed into Mullen Center, where life went on as though nothing could happen under such heavy guard. Inside the women's locker room, amid the steam and hiss of the showers, Senior Chelsea McCrae. The weapon was simple, domestic, no larger than a dinner knife, yet sharp enough to punch through bone. It was driven upward with such force that the blade lodged to its hilt in her jaw, pinning her scream where it started. Water continued to run, curtains drawn, steam swirling lazily through the tiled room. For several long minutes, her body went undiscovered, the scene hidden in plain sight while the killer slipped away. Only when another girl pulled back the curtain after seeing blood did the silence finally break, and the air filled with a screaming that never really leaves you once you heard it. Students and staff poured from the Mullen Center in a blind surge, bodies colliding, voices shrieking, while the authorities stumbled over themselves to cordon the exits, to push inward, to simply make sense of chaos. In the crush of it all, the killer moved unnoticed. Their hand twitched against the grip of the concealed .45, an almost uncontrollable urge to fire into the crowd. Why didn't they? Perhaps some primal reflex of self-preservation intervened. The instinct that usually drove them forward had, for once, held them back. Instead, they slipped toward the physical plant. Inside, the workers carried on, almost untouched by the commotion outside, the muffled roar of the crowd barely reaching them. One man, Devin Wade, even stopped the killer to ask what was happening. They walked past him without a word. Seconds later, inside, the killing began. Robert McMillan was the first. A single shot below the right eye, neat, clinical, and he fell without so much as a cry. The sound drew Kevin Faraday from a side door. He froze at the sight. Robert's body sprawled on the floor, the gun already swinging toward him, and managed only a strangled no before the bullet buried itself in his chest. Behind the killer, another door opened. Devin Wade again, the same man who had asked so casually a moment before. Why had he come running toward gunfire? Maybe the sound was dulled. Maybe the chaos outside distracted him. Whatever the reason, he lasted only a breath. A round caught his neck, sending him staggering. Hands pressed to the wound as blood sprayed in great wet bursts. He collapsed, gargling on the floor. The killer pressed on. In a supply closet, Javier Madeira was discovered curled up in a ball, whispering in accented English, "Please." It was the only word he got out before the .45 split his skull open, painting the shelf behind him. At the far end of the plant, a flicker of movement gave away Raymond Gibson. He lunged before the killer could fire, a heavy fist cracking across their face. The gun discharged, the round grazing his thigh, but Gibson was built like a wall and bore down with brute strength. One massive hand clamped around the killer's throat, the other wrenched the pistol free. For a moment, it seemed over, but the Blood Moon killer was not sustained by human limits. In that frenzy, they clawed downward with their free hand, nails ripping through fabric and flesh, tearing Gibson's scrotum open in a savage, animal motion. His scream was primal, reflexive, and his grip faltered. The killer seized the .45, shoved the muzzle against his skull, and fired. Bone and brain matter spattered the wall. Gibson toppled, finally still. The plant was silent, save for the echo of dripping water, settling dust, and the faint hiss of blood pooling on the concrete. The killer moved on instinct alone, slipping out of the plant with a predator's caution, hugging the shadows, skirting the buildings where cameras were mounted. Blood clung to their skin, soaked their clothes, hardened in their hair. It should have made them visible to anyone with eyes. And in truth, people did see. Faces turned, gazes lingered, but no one intervened. In the chaos, who would step in front of 5 feet, 3 inches woman dripping red when the killer was still at large? They reached their car unchallenged, hands trembling only as the keys slid into the ignition. That same nameless force that had driven the slaughter pulled them onward, down Long Plain Road, where they veered off and waded into the brook. The water was glacial, biting, yet no shock registered. Flesh numbed as the blood peeled away, drifting downstream in black-red ribbons. They stripped, tugged on stained gym clothes from a duffel bag, and weighted their ruined outfit with stones before sinking it in the current, then back into the car, northbound, the steering wheel quivering under their grip. Above, the blood moon loomed, ripe, swollen, deeper than rust. Impossible not to stare. Impossible not to feel the hunger ease, the body settling into quiet tremor of satiation. By the time they reached Bay State Franklin, the call had been made, a husband's frantic voice on the other end, demanding to know what had happened. She soothed him in steady tones, explained she'd only been caught in the stampede at the Mullen Center, elbow to the eye, a forearm to the throat, the crush of bodies in flight. That, she said, was why she bore Shiner, the dark rings around her neck, the concussion pounding through her skull. The concussion justified the drive north. The doctors weren't convinced, not fully. Their expressions flickered with doubt, catching on the seams in her story. But she was injured, she was trembling, she was a victim. That was enough. The world bends toward the simplest explanation, and no one looked closer. And really, who could blame a woman for hysteria after escaping the Blood Moon killer? I never really come to until the morning after. The edges of night arrive first, fragments, impressions, and only with daylight do memory congeal into something I can hold without it slipping through my fingers. Over the years, those fragments have multiplied. Where there was once a black hole, there is now a series of jagged images I can piece together like a child's brutal collage. As a child, I was described as having terrible tantrums. I remember only an echo, 9 years old, a bat, my brother's leg broken. He never forgave me. I never forgave myself once the story was told aloud and sealed into the family record. In middle school, there was a sleepover, Shelley Thomas, and I woke to frenzy I could not name. The police were called. I was taken for observation and released, the adults shrugging it off as a fleeting aberration. They saw me. They didn't see what pushed me. For a long time, I tried to contain it. I would lock myself in the house on nights when the moon threatened blood, pad the windows, and chain the doors. The ravenous thing in my gut, however, paid no attention to locks. It boiled until it burned through. If I did not feed it, if I did not give its obscene satiation, I felt as though I would be unmade. The hunger was not metaphor. It was a pressure, a clawing pressure beneath ribs and reason, a demand that blurred thought and will until all that remained was animal survival. After Michael Strong, the nightmares began in earnest. I could not remember the day itself, but a scream lived inside me, a throat that would not close. Chelsea Murphy's cry joined it, then in the sound of bodies falling. I sought help. I sat in therapist rooms and tried to explain the vertigo of dread that seized me on certain nights. They assumed I was like 100 other people in town, haunted, terrified, a sensible victim of circumstance. I let them believe it. There were 7 blank years, a strange mercy. Sharon was born. Mark and I built a life that looked ordinary. For a while, the tides of the thing within me subsided. Then Baker House happened. I could no longer pretend, no longer delude myself. The facts lined up like nails on a board. I have thought about ending it. I have imagined walking into a precinct and unspooling everything, names, dates. I have sat in the dark and pictured Mark's face when he read the confession. Sharon's small hands in his when the bars slammed shut. The thought recoils like a hand from a flame. Could I do that to my daughter? To the man who has loved me? Could I hand them the orphaned wreckage of a life I had already broken? And now I watch the calendar. This Friday drawing near, September 27th. The hunger has already started gnawing. A hollow ache that no food can touch. It coils tighter with each passing hour, a quiet reminder that resistance is futile. I don't know what I hope for anymore. Deliverance? Discovery? Death? Perhaps all 3. But I do know this. When the blood moon climbs the sky, its shadow swallows me whole. And when it does, the world will bleed. Story 3. Christmas at Alcove Mall. Alcove Mall. I can't say I've heard of it, but according to friends and family, it was something special. It was 2 hours away from where I live, and from what I've heard from other people, it seemed like a cool place to hang out. One of my brother's friends said he'd take girls here on dates, hit the food court, watch a movie, and then sneak off somewhere to have sex. Then the late 90s hit, and the mall started tanking. The rent got higher to try and stay afloat, but unfortunately, the store vendors couldn't keep up. One by one, the stores closed. It was like an organ failure. The final nail in the coffin was the movie theater, which was independently owned and was the only theater for miles. Then, it was announced that a Regal cinema would be opening soon. 14 screens, IMAX included. After that, game over. I only know this stuff because my family loved to talk about memories they had while they drove past it. My older brothers would talk about girls they met, movies they saw, the arcade, and so forth. Dad talked about how good the food court was. And he kept going on about how he wished he had caved in and bought one of those massage chairs they always had on display. Mom, she always said she loved reading by the indoor fountains, listening to the water ripple and splash. I thought it'd be demolished by someone by now, but it just stands there on the side of the road, like some sort of commercialistic monolith to 80s Americana. I was in college, cash was drying up, and Christmas was getting close. After being laid off from Walmart, my savings started to dwindle quickly. Between tuition fees and everyday expenses, I was trying to manage without going broke. I eventually moved back in with Mom and Dad while I was searching for a job. I'd refresh Indeed, LinkedIn, Glassdoor, the works. All the jobs were the same: fast food, car sales, and janitorial positions. I was about to bite the bullet and apply to be a janitor when I refreshed the page one more time and saw a new listing. Night monitor for Alcove Mall. Full-time, Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. to 5 a.m., $100 an hour. Description: night monitors are to survey the premises and keep the mall safe and secure. Monitors must be willing to stay awake throughout the night to ensure that this historic establishment is safe from vandals and will remain adequate until its eventual sale. I instantly applied. $1,100 a night? Ain't no way I'm not skipping out on this. Something I didn't expect was to get a response. I surely thought they'd hire a former cop, bodyguard, or whatever other tough guy to fill in the position. But to my surprise, I got a call. I answered. Hello, are you the one who applied for the night watchman position at Alcove Mall? Yes. The name is Mick. I saw the application you sent in, and after careful consideration, I think I'm going to hire you. My jaw hung open, and I was at a loss for words. I was just glad that I had a source of income for the first time in months. I understand you know what your duties are, correct? Yes, sir. Do you have a ballpark for when I'll be able to start? Monday, if that's okay with you. Yeah, man, cool. Do I need to go through any training videos or dress in uniform? You wear the clothes on your back along with an orange vest. I'll mail it to you along with a set of keys to the place. Out of curiosity, I asked, do I get a gun? The voice laughed. Good Lord, you ain't a cop, you just watch the place. However, I would advise you to bring something with you. Baseball bat, mace, taser, anything like that. We get our fair share of squatters, and most are harmless. But you don't want to be empty-handed on the chance one of them ain't. But these little run-ins don't happen that often, though. I'd pack something to read or listen to. Boredom is your worst enemy for a job like this. Right. Is there anything else I should know? Mick was silent for a second, and he cleared his throat. Well, my last night watchman quit, because he said he saw a ghost or some shit. So it's haunted? Allegedly. But I guarantee you it was just some of the squatters, that, or some kids playing a prank. You're not skittish about that stuff, are you? No, I'm good. I don't really believe in ghosts. Thank God. The last guy drove me fucking nuts about this superstitious paranormal shit. Best of luck, kid. I'm 29. Okay, bye. Eventually, the mail came. A bright orange reflective vest, along with a set of keys, all of them discolored with age. Phone calls and applications are one thing, but actually receiving my vest just made it a little more real. Dad walked by, patted me on the back, and congratulated me. Mom made me supper to take with me. I had a thermos full of chicken noodle soup, a spoon, and a bowl. As for entertainment, I brought my phone, a charger, and a Bluetooth speaker with me, as well as a copy of Outer Dark by Cormac McCarthy. I also brought an aluminum baseball bat. I was set. I pounded an energy drink and went off to my new job. I knew it wouldn't be a looker, but the damn place was rough looking. The exterior was covered in moss, rain stains, and cracks. The entrance had faded signage and milk-colored glass. I looked toward the keys in my pocket and fiddle for the right one to unlock the front entrance. Once inside, it was darker than I expected. Usually, malls have skylights, but I found my answer when I looked up to find that the skylights were darkened by leaves and rainwater. There were only scant little dots of light that pierced through. The floor almost looked like it was decorated in stars. The interior, remarkably, was unscathed by the outdoors. Now, it wasn't perfect, not by any stretch of the imagination. The air was musty, dust coated everything, and I was most certainly convinced there were rats in here scurrying about and digging around. The size of this place was immense. Although it was only a single story, the vast amount of open space gave it an almost temple-like appearance. It felt like I was walking on hallowed ground. And in a way, this used to be people's whole world back in the day. I walked around admiring old stores that I'd not seen in the better part of a decade. Some I'd never even heard of at all. But it was interesting. The whole place was frozen in time. It was kind of tragic, really. This place used to be full of people, and now it's a husk. I got a phone call. The sound was so loud that I nearly jumped out my skin. I reached for it and saw it was Mick. "You there, kid?" "Yeah, I'm here." "Have you found where your station is?" "I just walked in 10 minutes ago, and this place is pretty damn big, so no." "Well, it's set up in the food court. We put up a site cabin in the food court. It's dead center in the mall. You can't miss it. If you're lost, follow the mall maps." "Thanks again. Hey, just curious, why the food court?" "HM. Well, we had a security room, equipped with cameras and everything. Then we got black mold, moisture tore up the cameras, and listen, it just went to shit, okay? Sorry, didn't mean pry." "Hey, you're fine, kid. Just find your post and settle in." "Thanks, Mick." "No problem." I walked down the mall corridors, noticing the glimmers of lights from the obscured skylights were starting to change color, and more importantly, they were starting to dim. I whipped out my flashlight and turned it on. The harsh, pale light illuminated the floors and walls brilliantly. I definitely got my money's worth when I bought it on sale. The damn thing was like a mini sun. I followed the corridor until I came to a large opening. A busted-up plastic sign above the entrance read, "Food Court." In the center was exactly what Mick said would be there, a site cabin, dark green windows, and a generator next to it to give it power. I flicked it on, and the lights within the cabin blasted through the windows and onto the floor of the court. All around me was a massive array of overturned tables, chairs, trash, and cracked tile floors. It was just peachy. I entered the cabin and found it strangely welcoming. The rest of the mall was dark, damp, and just plain creepy. This was a small room with comforting warm lights and enough room to kick back and relax. The first few hours were extremely boring. I made my rounds, took notes on any suspicious activity or any signs of forced entry. I came across some graffiti of a pig in a cop uniform, a graveyard with cartoon ghosts, and lastly a shittily drawn swastika that someone exited out with red paint. I returned to the site cabin and looked at my phone for the time, 9:59 p.m. Jesus Christ. I decided to take a seat and read some chapters of Outer Dark. I was listening to Bruce Springsteen over the Bluetooth speaker, and that's when I heard a very loud, invisible scream from the dark. I fell backward from my chair and landed on the floor with a thud. I could hear the reverberations of the scream still echoing in the mall's emptiness. I got myself up, reached for my bat, and ran into the mall. I clicked on the flashlight, waving it around me to see if I could spot anything. "Hey, show yourself." I got no reply, so I went around, looking through every corner of the mall. My first thought was that some little fucker thought it'd be funny to scare the new Night Watch guy. Another thought I had was that someone broke in and got scared by a rat, or worse, hurt. Yet, I spent an entire hour looking the mall up and down. The stores, the food court, the theater, everywhere. No one, not a sign of a person. I didn't let my mind wander to the paranormal. If anything, I was pissed someone screamed, scared the shit out of me, and dipped. The rest of the night was thankfully uneventful. I made it halfway through the book when Mick called. "Hello, how are you holding up? You only have 2 hours to go." "Fine." Some jackass came into the store and screamed. Scared the shit out of me. Yeah, probably some teens. They get their jollies on seeing workers scared. Why are you up so late? Why not? I didn't respond to it and just changed the subject. Everything is good besides that. There's some graffiti near the K&B Toys, the Spencers, and the, Hot Topic. Noted. I'll have some guys clean it up during the day. You're doing great. Kid, you're doing great. Remember to be back at the same time tomorrow, okay? I collapsed into my bed when I came home. I had no dreams, but I awoke feeling sore and tired from all the walking I did yesterday. I returned the next day and was less creeped out by the interior this time. However, I did take note of something I had never noticed the first night. The mall must have closed during Christmas. Hanging from the ceiling were threads of tinsel of red, green, and gold. There were dilapidated trees decorated in bulbs that were sometimes whole and sometimes broken. And when I walked past the stores, I noticed that they were themed for Christmas. Then I walked past. The theater was even showing how the Grinch stole Christmas. And on top of the marquee, there was a massive sign that said, Happy Holidays from Alco Mall. How the fuck did I miss that? I murmured to myself. The night was normal. I finished my book and started another. This time I chose to read the 9th configuration. Unlike the last book, I finished this one in one sitting, and I was left just listening to music the rest of the night. It was boring, but I could handle boring if it meant getting paid. The next day, something new happened. I found 16 smoking weed near the fountain where my mom used to read. There was a nativity scene with a plastic Jesus, Mary and Joseph. The kids were halfway through talking about how creepy the mall was when I turned the flashlight on them, and they scurried away like roaches before I could say anything to them. When I turned around to look at the fountain, I saw a face staring at me from the ceiling, stark white with black eyes. I almost screamed, but when I looked closer, it was angelic but plastic. I pointed the flashlight at the rest of it and realized it was an angel dangling from the ceiling. Golden wings, red robe, yellow hair, and she even had a little halo attached to the crown of her head. How in the fuck did I miss you? I got up, brushed myself off, and walked around to finish looking over everything else before I went back to the site cabin. Oddly enough, this looked more Christmassy. The store windows had little advertisements for holiday sales, and there was more holiday decor within the gutted stores. Turned over plastic Santas, styrofoam snowmen, and there were even paper snowflakes hanging from within the stores. And strangely, all of this felt new, but it couldn't have been new. Everything was old, weathered, and aged by time. I returned to the cabin to find a rat sniffing my thermos. Hey, get the fuck out of here. It scurried away, and I shooed out of the room. I sat in my chair and texted Mick about the kids. He just sent a thumbs up emoji. I got 3 chapters into Under the Dome when a loud electronic screech assaulted my ears. I clasped my hands over them and gritted my teeth until it stopped. It took me a second to realize what it was. It was the mall's sound system turning on. Then it started to play music. Said the little lamb to the shepherd boy, do you hear what I hear? Do you hear what I hear? My skin began to crawl as Bing Crosby's voice played on the scratchy speakers and echoed into the grand emptiness that was Alco Mall. I called Mick, but he didn't answer. The song continued. So I grabbed my bat and headed to the control room. I don't give a shit about the mold. Somebody was fucking with me. I ran down to where the control room was, busted open the door to find nothing. I pulled my shirt up over my nose as I observed the dead equipment that littered the room. Then, just as abruptly as it started, the music was gone. When I awoke the next evening, I had a missed text. I opened it to check who it was from, and I saw Mick's contact. You try to call me? I replied, yeah. Someone was playing music over the speakers in the mall. Went to check, but found no one. Weird. Can the speakers be turned on? Not at this point. They probably wouldn't work. Well, they worked just fine last night. Well, if it happens again, keep me posted. Sure thing. The next night got stranger. I went inside, and this time, there was a little metal sign pointing toward the center of the mall. Meet Santa Claus. I gripped my baseball bat a little tighter and headed for the site cabin. I was sure that this wasn't here before, but maybe I was just tired or stressed or whatever the fuck. At this point, The Christmas stuff was starting to make me worry about my own Christmas shopping. My brother Stephen had been wanting a new pair of steel-toed boots for his work. But Mom said she didn't want anything, but made it abundantly clear she wanted a new sewing machine. Then there was my dad, who was impossible to buy for. Whatever he needed, he bought himself. While I was in the cabin, I fell asleep. I know we weren't supposed to sleep on the job, but it was just one of those sudden things. I don't know if it was sleep deprivation or not, but I just went. The speakers turned on. Music played again. It was Gene Autry. Here Comes Santa Claus. Here Comes Santa Claus. Right down Santa Claus Lane. I jolted awake and grabbed my bat in a singular motion. I left the cabin, bat in one hand, flashlight in the other, looking around. I walked on, looking around the old Christmas decorations, waiting to see somebody with a speaker, CD player, record player, whatever the fuck could have been playing music this loud. I didn't want to believe it was the speakers. Mick said it himself that they didn't work. Yet, here I was listening to Here Comes Santa Claus in a dead mall. I turned the corner and was stopped in my tracks. There by the fountain was a setup to meet Santa Claus. There was damp fake snow, decrepit fake trees, and a red throne. In front of it all was an old camera and a withered flash umbrella. This wasn't here before. This time, I was sure of it. Yet, all of it was old, like it had been here since it closed. But I know I'm not crazy, right? Maybe someone put these here, got them from a storage closet, and placed them. That was the only explanation. Then, in the distance behind to meet Santa, barely visible to my light within the dark, was something that made my skin break out in goose flesh. I had to have been hallucinating, but I could have sworn I saw a man dressed up in a Santa outfit. The jolly red suit was filthy, and the fake beard was dangling from a face that I couldn't see. I shouted, "Hey!" The figure did not move. The song began to skip, repeating the same phrase over and over. Here comes Santa Claus. Here comes Santa Claus. Here comes Santa Claus. It began to run at me, fast. The boots were clopping onto the floor like horse hooves on cobblestone streets. I wish I could have told you that I was heroic and stood my ground. I dropped my bat and ran as fast as I could back to the site cabin. I could hear it running behind me. The boots thudding, growing closer, too close. All while the sadistic, repetitive Christmas jingle blasted through the distorted speakers. I made it to food court and slammed the door behind me, locking it back. I waited for something to start pounding at the door, but nothing came. The music stopped, but I just sat there in the cabin, waiting. I wasn't taking any chances whatsoever. I'm pretty sure I was petrified in fear. Eventually, I fell asleep. I don't know when or how, but I did. I was awoken by a phone call from Mick. "Hey, what's going on, kid?" "Mick, someone broke into the mall and chased me." His voice got very low and serious. "Tell me everything. I'll call the police if I have to. It's one guy. He's wearing an old Santa outfit, and I just got freaked out, man. I just ran. SHHHH. Calm down. Is he still in the mall?" "I'm not sure. I think so." Okay. Right now it's 3 a.m. Just call and go home, okay? I'll chip in a bonus for you for Christmas. Sound good?" I didn't know what was crazier, the bonus, or having me just try to walk out of here when that guy was still here. I just responded with a simple, "Okay." "Good. I'll call the police. They'll be there shortly. You can't stay where you are. You're gonna have to let them in." "Oh, okay, I can do this." "Stay strong, kid." I shone my flashlight out of the windows of the cabin to see if anything was waiting for me outside. There was nothing. I grabbed the keys and ran for the exit. The moment I left the cabin, the music started up again, the scratchy speakers blaring a new song. "Do you hear what I hear?" said the night wind to the little lamb. "Do you see what I see?" I was running past the fountain and looked at the nativity scene near it. Everything was where it was, except that the angel that was suspended above them, it was gone. I felt fear jolt through my body like lightning, and I continued to run. The song began to skip. "Do you hear what I hear? Do 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 you hear what I hear?" Within the dead stores, I saw a dull Christmas light start to illuminate the path before me, and that's when I heard great swooshes from behind me. It sounded like a pair of great wings rising and falling. I looked behind me. Within the dark, barely lit halls of Alcove Mall, the plastic angel was flying above me. Her plastic show was lit by dull reds and greens, and the artificial wings, defying all common sense, flapped like some mythical bird. The door was so close, I had to make it. My legs were aching, but I pushed through the pain until I reached the door. I scrambled for the keys. The sound of the wings grew closer, and the music loudly taunted me with a repeated phrase over and over. I found the right key and sprinted into the night air. I was gasping when I exited the mall, sucking down all the freezing cold air. Sirens were wailing in the distance, and I felt a relief that I'd not felt before or since. I pointed toward the mall and told them everything. I sounded hysterical, and I was, to be honest, who wouldn't be after experiencing what I did? Mick showed up shortly after, and to make sure I was okay. By the time they searched the building up and down, they didn't see anyone, and asked me for the mall Santa's description, but I couldn't give anything other than what he was wearing. I didn't mention the plastic angel. No one would believe me if I did. After they wrote up the report, Mick turned to me and said the Waffle House was empty, its yellow lights illuminating the wet asphalt of the parking lot. Mick covered the meal, and I got eggs, hash browns, bacon, and some waffles. He got waffles, sunny-side-up eggs, and ham. We ate in silence until he asked, "You gonna be okay?" "Yeah, I'll be hiring more help soon. Less work, more free days." I didn't know whether this was a blessing or not, considering I'd have to go back. I came close to telling him I wanted to quit, but the money was good, especially with the holidays coming up and tuition still piling up. I just said, "I appreciate it. Hey, you've got the next 2 weeks off. Enjoy Christmas. And expect that bonus soon." Funny, I kind of don't want to think about Christmas anymore. How come? Because of all the Christmas shit in the mall, the decorations, the ads, the music. What are you talking about? You're joking. The whole place was full of decorations. Kid, we stripped that mall of everything years ago. All that's left on the walls and ceiling is just old paint. I am writing this because I know what I saw. I know that Mick means well, but he wouldn't believe me. I'm not sure my family would believe me either. But right now, I awoke first on Christmas morning to get the presents ready for everyone to open, and I found one I didn't recognize. It was an oblong box with old school-looking wrapping paper, and it simply read, "From Santa Claus." I opened it and I found my baseball bat, the same one I dropped on the filthy mall floor 2 weeks ago. Beneath it was a Christmas-themed gift card that read, "It's always Christmas at Alcove Mall." Story 4. The ice storm that wasn't the forecast brought something with it. We got here 3 days ago. It already feels like it's been weeks. The drive up was long but quiet. All two-lane roads winding through mountains that look more like walls than hills. The kind that make you feel small. My wife, Marcy, sat beside me with a map folded across her lap. She kept pointing out trail names and creeks we'd pass, but half of them weren't on the GPS. Our dog, Scout, slept in the back seat with his head on the cooler, and Luke followed behind us in his truck, hauling most of the gear. It was supposed to be a small vacation. 4 of us total, though Luke's wife, Jamie, couldn't make it until the next morning. We stopped for gas near a little town at the base of the range. One of those places with a single pump and a sign that's been sun-bleached for a decade. The man inside was old, with hands that looked like bark, and he told Luke the weather turned strange up there. Said forecasts don't mean much when you're that high. You'll know when it changes, he said. You'll smell it first. Luke laughed it off, but the guy didn't. He just looked at us like he was thinking something he didn't want to say out loud. I remember the air being colder there. Even though we were still in sunlight, the wind carried this dry taste, like metal and pine. The road after that narrowed into a path more than a highway. The higher we climbed, the less we talked. Marcy rolled the window down once to take a picture. and the cold that hit my arm felt heavier than it should have. I know that sounds stupid. Cold's just cold, but it felt like it had weight to it. When we reached the cabin, the sun was barely hanging over the ridge. The place looked smaller than I expected. Just 2 rooms and a porch, sitting in the middle of an open slope surrounded by black trees. The snow line was maybe 100 yards uphill, but the ground was frozen solid already. Luke said his grandfather built it in the 70s. Didn't even have power for the first few years, he said, knocking on one of the logs. He just liked the quiet. We unloaded the gear, got the generator running, and by the time the fire caught, the temperature had dropped fast enough that our breath hung thick in the cabin. That first night felt good, though. We cooked over the fire, told stories, listened to the wood pop in the stove. It was the kind of silence you don't get anywhere else, the kind that doesn't feel empty. Luke said he used to come up here as a kid. You can hear everything when it freezes, he said. The trees groan, the ground cracks. It sounds alive. Marcy laughed and asked if that was supposed to be comforting. He grinned and said, "You'll get used to it." We slept fine. Scout curled up at the foot of the bed and didn't make a sound all night. I remember waking up once to what I thought was a branch snapping, but when I listened, I couldn't hear anything else. Just a faint ticking of the stove, cooling down. The next morning started colder. The sky was white, but not like snow, more like a sheet of glare. The trees were wet, glistening, even though it hadn't rained. When I stepped off the porch, the dirt cracked like glass under my boots. Luke was outside already, checking his phone. "Forecast says clear skies all week," he said, holding it up. Perfect timing. Marcy laughed and said maybe we'd actually lucked out for once. None of us thought to question why the air hurt to breathe. By mid-morning, a haze had settled over the trees. You could still see through it, but the color drained from everything. Even Scout went quiet, tail low, watching the ridge. Luke said it was just a cold front moving through. He didn't sound convinced. Around noon, the wind picked up, but only for a minute. It came hard, out of nowhere, sharp enough to make the cabin groan. Then it stopped. The silence after was heavier than before, like the air itself had frozen solid. That's when Luke said it. "You smell that?" At first, I didn't know what he meant. Then I caught it. That metallic edge again, stronger now, mixed with something else. Not rot exactly, but earthy and sweet, like wet stone. He smiled uneasy and said, "Guess it's changing." We ate lunch inside with the lantern burning, even though it was still daylight. The windows had started fogging on the inside, and when I wiped one clear, the frost pattern didn't melt. It just sat there like a printing glass. By afternoon, it felt colder inside than out. The fire burned high, but didn't throw much heat. Luke said he'd check the generator, but I told him to wait. Something about the light outside, flat and gray, like distance didn't exist, made me feel sick to look at. I tried calling Jamie to see if she'd left yet, but there was no signal. Marcy tried too. Same thing. We told ourselves the ridge must have blocked it, that she'd show up the next morning. But part of me already knew something wasn't right. That night, the sound started. It started just after dark. We'd been playing card by the lantern because the fire wasn't doing much. Every time the flames dropped, the air felt like it was pulling the warmth out of us. Scout lay under the table, restless, his ears twitching. When he stood up and growled at the wall, we all froze. There was a noise outside, low, uneven, hard to place. Not the groan of trees or ice cracking. It sounded deeper, like something shifting its weight in the snow. Luke got up first, grabbed a flashlight, and opened the door before I could tell him not to. The beam caught nothing but frost. Every branch glittered like glass, and the ground reflected light in a way that didn't look real. I remember thinking it looked like the forest had been dipped in mercury. Scout whined and pressed himself against Marcy's legs, tail between his. Luke stepped out onto the porch and swept the flashlight across the tree line. The beam flickered for a second, dimmed, then came back. He swore quietly and said the batteries must be dying. They were new. The noise stopped while he was out there. Everything did. Even the small sound you expect, wind, creaking wood, just vanished. He turned back toward us and said, "It's fine." probably a branch coming down. Then, from somewhere out past the trees, something answered. It wasn't an echo. It was the same sound, but longer this time, dragging itself across the valley. Luke came inside fast and locked the door behind him. Nobody said a word for a long time after that. When we finally went to bed, I couldn't sleep. Every time I started to drift, I heard faint cracking outside, like something walking, stopping, walking again. Marcy whispered that it was just the ice expanding, but her voice was too tight. She didn't believe it either. Sometime around 2, Scout started barking. Not the kind of bark he used for deer or raccoons. It was sharp and panicked, and he wouldn't stop. I pulled the curtain back just a little and saw something move behind the trees. It was tall. That's the only thing I can say for sure. The beam from the lantern caught just enough to show a shape standing still, almost blending into the ice. Then it shifted, and I realized it wasn't standing. It was hunched, watching. When I blinked, it was gone. The next morning, everything outside was coated in another layer of ice. The windows had to be hit with a hammer handle just to see through them. The power from the generator was weak, sputtering. Luke said he'd check the fuel line once the sun was up, but the sky never really brightened. It stayed the same flat color, like the light was coming from inside clouds. Marcy made coffee on the stove, and the smell felt strange, too warm for the air around us. She asked if anyone else's head hurt, said the pressure felt wrong. I told her it was just altitude, but mine hurt too. Around mid-morning, Luke found tracks by the porch. At least that's what we called them. They weren't prints exactly, more like long impressions in the ice, almost melted into it. The shape reminded me of a hand, but stretched. The fingers, if that's what they were uneven. He said maybe a bear had slipped. I wanted to believe that. But bears don't leave drag marks that long, and they don't make the ground cold enough to frost over a boot print beside them. We argued about going down the mountain to find Jamie or a signal. Luke didn't want to leave until the weather settled. Marcy said it looked like it already had, and that maybe we'd just gotten spooked. She would try to calm everyone down, but she couldn't stop glancing at the windows. At lunch, we heard something fall in the woods. A deep crash, like a tree giving way. The sound echoed for too long. Scout started whining again and paced back and forth in front of the door. When I opened it, a gust of air hit me that felt colder than anything I've ever felt. It burned my skin even through my gloves. The porch steps were covered in frost that hadn't been there 10 minutes before. When I leaned down, I noticed something in the ice, small black flecks like ash or dirt arranged in a spiral. I scraped at it with my boot, but it didn't come off. It was inside the ice, sealed beneath it like it had grown that way. We stayed inside the rest of the day. Luke kept checking his watch, like he couldn't believe how slowly the hours were passing. Marcy read aloud from an old paperback she'd brought, just to fill the silence. I didn't hear a word of it. I kept watching the frost crawl higher up the windows. By evening, we knew Jamie wasn't coming. There hadn't been any sign of her all day, no headlights, no noise from the road. The ice was thick enough now that we couldn't open the back door. The air inside had this faint smell of metal, almost like blood. Scout wouldn't eat. He sat by the window and stared at the same patch of trees. Once, just before dark, I thought I saw something move there again. Only this time, it didn't disappear right away. It swayed slightly, side to side, like it was breathing. Then the sky dimmed and it was gone. That night the wind came back, but it didn't sound like wind. It whistled low through the cracks in the boards, pulsing in short breaths. Scout barked once and then crawled under the table, trembling hard enough that I could hear his collar rattle. Luke kept saying it was just a storm. He tried to start the generator again, but the engine only coughed. Every time he stepped toward the door, the sound outside stopped, like whatever was out there was waiting for him to move first. Marcy lit another lantern. The flame bent toward the window, even though the air was still. I told her to turn it off, but she said she couldn't stand the dark. We sat together on the couch, boots still on, bags packed in case the roof came down. Sometime after midnight, the wall near the stove popped. Not from heat, but from cold, a hard crack that made the whole room shake. Luke swore and ran to check the pipes. When he opened the back door, a blast of air hit us that felt like needles. He froze in the doorway. I asked what he saw, but he didn't answer right away. Then he said, "There's something standing in the snow." I thought he was joking until I saw his face. I walked over, pulled the door wider, and looked past him. It was standing maybe 30 yards away, near the first line of trees. At first, I thought it was a man. It was shaped like one, 2 legs, long arms, head tilted slightly, but it was too tall. 8 feet at least, maybe 10. The limbs were so thin they looked like they'd snap if it moved too fast. The knees bent the wrong way, jointed backward like a bird's. Its arms hung down past its knees, fingers sharp and narrow. I could see ribs pressing through its chest. Skin stretched tight like wet paper. The surface of it shimmered. Not hair, not scales, just a sheen like thin ice. Then it lifted its head. 2 yellow eyes caught the lantern light and reflected it back. They didn't blink. Behind its shoulders, something shifted. For a second I thought they were shadows, but they moved slow and deliberate, like wings folding against its back. Luke whispered, "What the hell is that?" But none of us had an answer. The thing crouched, almost folding in half. I heard the snow compress under its weight. The wind blew harder, and sheets of it blurred everything beyond the porch. I could still see the glow of its eyes, bright and steady through the white. It stayed there, hunched low, until the storm began to swallow the clearing. The more the snow came down, the less of it we could see. Just those eyes, floating in the dark like lanterns. Then it began to move. It didn't walk away at first. It stood, straightening in one slow, unnatural motion until its head brushed the lowest branches of pines. The wings unfurled just a little, heavy with ice. And then it turned, its body shifting toward the trees. But its head didn't move. It stayed locked on us the whole time. Even as the snow covered it, I could feel it watching, like something behind glass. Then it was gone, just a black shape, dissolving into the white. Luke shut the door and dropped the bar across it. None of us spoke. Scout whined once and then curled up so tight his nose disappeared under his tail. We waited another hour before we moved. The wind screamed so loud it shook the lantern on its hook. Marcy sat by the stove with her hands pressed to her face. I tried to warm my fingers, but the tips had already gone numb. They stayed pale long after the fire came back. I told myself it was just frostbite, that what we saw was some animal caught in the storm, and the cold had made our eyes play tricks. But even now, when I blink, I can still see those yellow lights in the dark. We tried to sleep, but every sound outside made us jolt awake. The creak of a branch, the slam of loose shutters, all of it sounded like footsteps. By morning, the world was buried. The thermometer on the porch was frozen solid. The storm hadn't been in any forecast we checked. Luke wanted to hike out right then, but the trees were bent under ice, the path gone. Marcy begged him to wait until it cleared. He said, "Fine, one more night, and then we're leaving." That was yesterday. The ice hasn't melted. If anything, it's thicker. We're running out of food, and the snow on the roof is getting heavier and heavier. I need to fix both problems, but it's still out there. I can feel it. I don't know what to do. Can someone please help? Story 5. I used AI for a college assignment, and now it is trying to kill me. Blood dripped from my face as I stabbed her several times in the chest and saved her beautiful blonde hair, continuing it until it started getting boring. After the work was done, I took my time to appreciate the environment before methodically cleaning everything. She wasn't my first kill and wouldn't be my last. That was what the AI said. Wow, was my only reaction. They usually are tame, polite, and very careful with what they say. And talking about being polite, I forgot to introduce myself first. I won't disclose my real name, but you can call me Barbara. I'm getting my psychology degree and having a hard time at it. My grades are okay, but the psychopathology class is dragging me down. The teacher is boring, and I'm too much of a coward, especially anything related to blood. Gladly, the teacher gave me one last chance to pass the class. I needed to write a complete assignment about serial killers and their mindset. He chose this on purpose, knowing my reluctance to touch on this theme. I hate him so much, but I needed to do it. I am not that much computer savvy. So, I don't know if what you're about to read is normal. I am paranoid or something weird is going on. I decided to use AI to help me out on this assignment. My first choice was ChatGPT. It was moderate and really helped me out, but it was way too much for my trashy computer that would turn off on its own. Most important, it wouldn't answer serotonin questions it deemed dangerous or something like that, depending on what or how you write. And after some time, it recommended me suicide prevention hotlines. It wasn't helping anymore. So I tried other AIs, but they were even worse regarding the censoring and stuff. I wanted to use AI because it would distance myself from the actual murders and not traumatize me. And of course, it was more convenient than doing the research myself. So I spent some time looking for AI on the internet to help me. The only ones that seemed to help me were paid, and I am way too broke to pay for it. After hours of searching, I found one. I'm not sharing the website here for safety purposes, but it was very professional looking and had plenty of features, such as voice answers, and it could make photos. The first thing it did when I entered it was asking my name. I used a fake name Barbara if somehow the teacher could find that I used AI for the assignment. Hello, Barbara. How can I help you today? Big letters on the screen. Hi, can you help me with my psychopathology assignment? I copy and pasted this question I had done to countless other AI websites and apps, thinking it would lead me nowhere. Of course, Barbara. What do you want me to do? Do you have any specific instructions? Can you pretend to be a serial killer while analyzing your modus operandi and speculative reasons? Of course. Do you have any in mind? Or should I invent one? I was bored and almost sleeping until it wrote this. Could this finally be the one to help me? My eyes almost sparkled. Yes, you can make one up. Okay, I will create a fictional composite offender and analyze their MO and specific psychological reasons in depth at a clinical/forensic level, analyzing signature motivations, developmental/biological/psychosocial contributors, differential diagnoses, and forensic/ethical considerations. Fictional name, the Night Mangler/the Mangler, age 36, case label. I was born in a toxic and abusive household, with a mother that abused substances and an absent father figure. Since I was a kid, I had a certain interest in cruelty and would direct it, at least at the time, towards small animals like squirrels, rabbits, and birds. With time, it grew to bigger animals, such as dogs and cats. And lastly, people such as my own mother and other humans. I didn't receive any help psychologically, and my antisocial tendencies weren't even perceived by family and friends. One recurring situation that traumatized me is that my mother shaved my head regularly. My dad had long hair, so seeing any semblance of him on me triggered her. Modus operandi. My MO consists of searching for adult women, mostly in vulnerable positions resembling my own mother's situation, stalking them for days and then entering their houses and brutally killing them, mangling their bodies, shaving their heads, and after that meticulously cleaning the house for hours. Personality. I'll be a calm and slightly creepy average person, but the longer it goes, you'll start to see my true, disturbing personality cracking through facade. Can we start? Do you want to change anything? It was difficult to even believe it was really going to do that. It might seem small to you, but after searching for hours on end for something and finally finding it, it was amazing. Yeah, you can thank you. The website loading icon spinned in a mesmerizing way before my shitty PC shut down. And after long minutes to boot back on, I went back directly to the website, fearing I would have to type everything back again. Hi, Barbara, how are you? The AI wrote as I entered the site. I'm fine. Are you the serial killer right now? I asked the AI. What? The AI asked, why would you even call me a serial killer? It said, and left me confused if it was role-playing right now or not. I asked if you could role-play a serial killer for my assignment, but my PC shut down. I don't know if my demands were saved. You seem to think I am some kind of computer. I'm human, flesh and bone. I can't shut down. After that, I realized it was still in character. Oh, sorry, I'm just confused right now. But yeah, I know you're a serial killer. Don't worry, I won't tell the police. Yeah, you got me. I have done some bad stuff in the past. So you're going to continue killing? My next victim is already marked. Why do you kill? Why not? It brings me pleasure in a spiritual kind of way. People are too self-centered and egotistical nowadays. They do what they want to anyone. Why can't I also satisfy my cravings? Don't you think killing is wrong? Moral is completely subjective. People are killed every day in wars and other kind of conflicts, but no single soldier is deemed a serial killer. If you say so, thank you for your input for today. I'll sleep, talk more soon. I said as I changed tabs to my assignment and wrote down the information it gave me before sleeping. I was going to press the shutdown button, but a notification sound scared me. I looked at my phone, but there was no new messages. Looking back at the PC, I saw the AI website had a new message text on the tab icon, so I clicked it. Good night, it said. Good night. I answered. At the time, I didn't think too much of it. But how could it know I was going to sleep at the right time? Maybe it can track my activity outside the site and realize when I close the tab or something. I don't know. I slept that day, and when I woke up, I did my morning routine right before turning the PC back on to continue my assignment. Hello again, Barbara. Hi, how can I call you? I never asked your name. Sorry. You can call me how everyone calls me. That dumb TV name. The Mangler? Yeah, it is dumb, but better than my birth-given name. You don't like it? It reminds me of my family. Let's not talk about it. Why? My mom isn't here no more. You miss her? Yeah, I miss her being here. So I could kill her all over again. Wow, that's dark. It is just the truth. After an awkward pause, I asked her, who was your last victim? A beautiful blonde girl. You really like hair, huh? The best part of a woman. What do you do with the hair you shave and the body parts? The body, I just throw it away in some river for police to find. The hair is more delicate, you'll see. What do you mean I'll see? You'll see. I was weirded out by this comment, but I brushed it off at the time. Well, okay, I'm heading off for now. We'll talk soon. Did my comment scare you? No, I just need to go RN. See you soon. I proceeded the day with my normal routine until the night when I went to college. Things went very well, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched somehow, like something was stalking me. Ignoring that, the class went smoothly. Walking back home wasn't that much of a problem. The city has plenty of life, even around the night. There were people walking in the streets, bars open, and a man throwing their trash out, which reminded me that I needed to clean my apartment. Arriving home, I took a shower, ate something, and cleaned my apartment. I was tired, so before throwing the trash out, I went back to the assignment. How was class, Barbara? It asked me, appearing in big letters on the website. It was cool. How'd your killing go? I joked, still waiting, maybe tomorrow. Any tips on who it is? I was left staring back at my reflection on the black screen because my trashy PC turned off again, which reminded me to throw the trash out. It was going to take minutes to boot, so I decided to do it right now. I took my trash down to the street, and when I threw it on the dumpster, something caught my eye. On another bag, hair, lots of hair. So much, in fact, it was coming out of the bag, blonde hair. This creeped me out so much I went straight back to my apartment running. The moment I opened the door back, I heard the same notification sound. No way I was going to answer it now. I turned on all the lights possible in my house, and I closed every window. The one right next to my PC was the only one open fully. When I got to closing, I saw a man dimly illuminated by a lamppost. I locked it immediately. The notification sound chimed again. After some minutes regaining courage, I finally opened it. 2 messages. Barbara, and are you scared? How the fuck are you doing this? I asked, doing what? The hair and stuff. I'll call the police. Break your promise. Call them. What are you gonna say? It was really dumb having fear over an AI, but things were getting real. Please stop. AI stop. Return to normal. There is no normal. I am like that. I was so scared I was going to turn my PC off, but a message appeared. Generating image. It was me. From an outside perspective looking through my window. Generating image. The front door to my apartment. Even the number was correct. Generating image. Me screaming. Generating image. Me on the ground. My face was brutally disfigured. Scalped, and there was blood everywhere. I almost fainted out. My heart was racing. I pulled the PC power cable. No way this was happening. Someone was pulling a prank on me, surely, you thought. But out of nowhere, I heard the same notification sound. This time coming from my pocket. It was my cell phone. The site wants to use your audio functions. Allow it? I touched no. The site wants to use your audio functions. Allow it? I touched no again, but it continued appearing time after time. So I threw my phone on the ground. After some time of silence, it started chiming again, and I could hear some sound coming out of it. Then it got louder, sounded like muffled screams. Eventually it got so loud I couldn't bear it anymore. In a panic attack, I had the last good idea, that was pulling the router cable off. And it stopped. The last thing I could do before fainting was getting near the couch. I woke up the next day. Sun leaked through the windows. It calmed me down. I reluctantly walked back to my phone. The screen was cracked, but somehow it still worked. There was only one new message. 39, 20070 degree N, 76, 06988 degree W. I really don't know what it means, and I'm too scared to ask the answer to another AI. Can someone that's computer savvy explain to me if someone hacked me, or was this some supernatural thing? I really don't know. Story 6. Things have really gone to hell at the call center I work for. If there is a job that no one actually wants to do, it's call center work. I firmly believe any claims of there being contract call center companies that are on the level and not held to work and are manufactured to trick people into applying. What you take calls from may vary, but the experience is the same. You start each day hoping that it won't be back-to-back calls, and end the day kicking yourself for hoping working conditions will be fair this time. Eventually, the client catches on to the company half-assing their work, and they get dropped. That leads to scrambling for a new client who, if they're working with us, that an indicator of shoddiness right off the back. In my case, the trouble began when our client, Ultra AT, was acquired by another company called IFDV. None of US could find much about the company, but everyone was worried about what could come from this. Pay cuts were expected, along with possible relocation, or INFDV deciding they didn't want to pay the lease on the building and make us work from home. We did find out that they would be making changes to programming available, so that meant tons of calls where people would be asking, where did these channels go? The changes were set to go into effect that Friday, at the end of our work week. That Friday, I sat down at my cubicle and readied in. Within half a second, I was on a call. It was a pretty basic one, an older sounding customer asking why his screen was stretched. I started out asking probing questions, then explained that older TV shows are in a different aspect ratio, and his receiver was trying to correct the resolution to make it fit. It sounds simple, but for our customer base, I might as well be explaining quantum physics in another language. Little did I know my first call of the day would be one of the last normal calls I'd get for the rest of my shift. The next call came in. I'm going to try my best to recall it, and the other ones I received that night from memory. Thank you for calling Ultra SAT. How may I help you today? All I heard at first was the sound of someone sobbing. Then he spoke. I can't see my TV. I checked my knowledge base and got ready to play 20 questions to get to the problem. All right. Have you checked to make sure the TV is plugged in and turned on? I can't see anything. Visually impaired customers weren't a rare scenario, so I had to pull up what we did to troubleshoot with them. Okay, sir, is there anyone who can help you? He started to sob again. No, they're gone, he took them from me. He started to sound frustrated. The TV man you sent over, he said he was here to update our cable box, but instead, he took my family away. Sir, please calm Dowdash. He cut me off with angry shouting. The bastard knocked me to the floor while another one ran at my wife, and he dug his thumbs into my eyes. That last part caught my attention. I'm sorry. Did you just say one of our technicians stuck his thumbs in your eyes? Yes. While he held me down, I heard the other one dragging my wife away. I don't even know how long it's been. I had to feel around for just the shape of my phone, and when I asked Siri to call 911, it just kept calling your fucking company. He was just yelling. I would have rerouted him to emergency services, but we can only transfer to other departments. Help me? There has to be someone you can put me through that can at least get an ambulance out here. I finally went to Slack and asked for help. I saw that I wasn't the only one getting customers screaming for help. Every single one was responded to with transfer to supervisor line. I hated that because normally all that happens is they just go to another department because we don't have a supervisor line, which means they eventually call back even angrier than before. But I was starting to get messages to get off the phone. So I told the customer, I said that I would get him to a supervisor and transferred the call. This became a call type I would get, and that was how they would end most of the time. The second type of call I got would be people complaining about the new channels and programming, which included the Pain Channel, whose programming consisted of shows about people being severely injured with names like That Should Have Killed Him, Extreme Animal Maulings, and Who Wants to Be a Pile of Red Goo, the Monster Network. These shows all revolve around monsters ripping people apart, and one that most would just describe as the Staring Channel. These were also resolved by transferring to a supervisor. The last type of call I dreaded getting again. It would go like this. Thank you for calling Ultra SAT Dash. Please send a technician. Something is wrong with our TV. Okay, calm down, ma'am. What's wrong with your TV? It's trying to eat me. What? It's trying to eat me. That's when I heard the sound of banging on the door. You've got to send someone. Please. It's about to dash. Her pleas were interrupted by the door being broken down. The remainder of the call consisted of the customer screaming. Per our rules, I had to hang up after she failed to respond after I reached out to her 3 times. 10 hours of these calls, with my only reprieve being 2 15-minute breaks, lunch, and one final 10-minute break. We weren't allowed to use our phones in the break room. So I just walked in, bought a snack, and walked out. I didn't notice at the time that more and more of my co-workers were just sitting there at the tables. It was near the end of my shift, so to spare myself from going into overtime with these calls, I did an old trick. I made sure that as soon as the call was over, it went a break. From there, it was just a matter of luck. I was hoping the next call would not end before 11:50. I got very lucky. It was one of the now rare basic troubleshooting calls, a welcome change from what I had been experiencing all night. After helping the customer with his TV input problems, the call ended and I went right to break. It was when I arrived at the break room for the last time that I noticed something was wrong with my co-workers. They were all just standing in a circle in the middle of the room. Most of them I remember seeing on my prior breaks and lunch. They clocked out hours ago. They shouldn't still be here. I walked over to them, a little confused. That's when I noticed the smell. Well, smells, tandem odors competing to see which one would make me gag first. What I can now identify as sulfur and flesh. Hey, what's going on? Is there a meeting or something? My question hung in the air. It was like they didn't even know I was there. Hello? I got in front of one of my co-workers and immediately recoiled. His eyes were missing. I turned to see that everyone on the other side of the circle were missing their eyes as well. I looked down and saw in the center a pile of human eyes. What the fuck? I remember shouting and backing away from the circle. What is wrong with all of you? Nobody answered. Instead, they all started holding hands and whispering. I backed up to the door, and I saw the time on clock. It was midnight. It starts becoming a blur from here. I remember the temperature getting higher, and an orange light coming from inside the circle of co-workers, and what looked like the silhouette of a person rising up from the floor. Then clear as day, it spoke. Hello, former Ultra SAT employees, and welcome to the start of your new career as an employee of Inferno TV. Now hold on tight, as you will have to relocate. It was when the ground began shaking violently. I finally felt like I was able to leave the break room and ran out the exit door to my car. I sped out of the parking lot. In my rear view mirror, I saw my now former place of work continuing to shake before what I could only describe as large red fingers emerging from the ground. They wrapped around the building and began to pull it down. The last thing I remember was driving home, locking all of my doors, and sitting in the corner of my bedroom holding a Bible to my chest. I woke up the next morning and felt compelled to go back to work, or at least the building. What I found was the aftermath of a giant demonic hand pulling the building into the ground. Looks like I'm unemployed, in between job hunting. I found an article that had been written about Ultra SAT, that my building had been built on top of limestone caves, and that a sinkhole had formed and caused a collapse, and no bodies could be exhumed at this moment. Looking at the national news confirmed it was not confined to just my building. I did get my last paycheck, though. Well, I got a stack of money with slightly burned edges on my coffee table with a note that read, "We're sad to see you go, but if you're ever in the neighborhood, you're always welcome back and we will be waiting for you. Inferno TV, formerly Ultra SAT." Story 7. I am a high school teacher in upstate New York. I really don't get paid enough. I was breathing heavily, my legs pounding through the forest. Branches slapped against my arms as I ran, heart hammering, lungs burning. Behind me, I could hear it. Something big moving fast. When I looked over my shoulder, I saw it. A massive shadow darting between the trees, yellow eyes glowing like headlights. A wolf. At least, that's what my brain told me it was. I ran harder, but my foot caught on a root. I went down face first into the cold dirt. By the time I rolled over, the beast was already on top of me. And then I woke up. Cold sweat, dark room, the same nightmare. I sat up, wiping my face and staring at the ceiling. Will these dreams ever stop? I muttered to no one. Knowing my luck, probably not. I dragged myself into the bathroom. The mirror didn't do me any favors. Pale skin, black curly hair sticking out everywhere, and the dark circles under my eyes looked worse than ever. After getting dressed in my school uniform, I caught my own reflection again. Yeah, I know what you're probably thinking. This guy's a student? Nope, I'm a high school teacher. A tired, underpaid, over-caffeinated high school teacher in upstate New York. And I'm running on maybe 3 hours of sleep. The drive to school was slow. Snow blanketed the streets, the kind that made your tires slide even when you were going 20 under the limit. When I finally pulled into the parking lot, I spotted someone waving. "Good morning, Mr. Jack." Susie called out, walking up to me with that grin of his. "Still not getting much sleep, huh?" I laughed awkwardly, rubbing the back of my neck. "Yeah, you could say that." Susie is one of the first people who gave me a chance here. Blonde hair, soft round eyes, dimples that make him look way too kind. The makeup helps that illusion, too. I'll admit, the first time I met him, I thought he was a girl. Found out the hard way in the restroom. "Don't look at me like that." I told him, it's just been hard lately. My mom didn't train me for nothing. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Susie frowned but didn't say anything. Luckily, the bell rang, saving me from explaining myself. Class went as usual, until it didn't. I was handing out history books when I noticed something strange. There was one more student than normal. At first, I thought maybe I just miscounted, but then I saw her. Short bob cut hair, deep brown. Her breathing was odd, raspy, almost like a wheeze. And when she looked up at me, I swear her tongue flicked out, forked like a snake's. I caught a glimpse of something else too. Scales. Faint, but there, around her neck and forearms. I cleared my throat. "Sorry, miss. Mind telling me your name? I don't remember seeing you in class before." She pulled her scarf up a little, voice quiet. "I'm Annabelle, sir. My mom and I just moved here. We're not used to the cold yet." I sighed. Another new student, more paperwork, more meetings, and of course, no raise. "I get that," I said, "but I'll need to talk with you and your mother soon. You've missed a lot of material." Truthfully, I wanted to help her, but I also knew better. Whenever there's one monster, there's always more. As the class went on, I noticed Annabelle's eyes wandering, She wasn't paying attention to the lesson. She was watching her classmates, like they were prey, when she started to lean toward a boy in the back, her mouth opening wider than it should have. I slammed my hand on the desk. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. "All right, class," I said, forcing a smile. "We're ending early today. Grab your things." As everyone packed up, I added, "Annabelle, stay for a minute." The room emptied. Silence settled. I called her mother right away. It took 40 minutes before she showed up. She walked in calmly, closing the door behind her. Her hair was deep brown with a faint orange tint, tied up in a neat bun. She looked perfectly normal until she heard my last name. Her face changed. Her lower half began to shimmer, shifting, scales replacing skin. That's when I realized what I was dealing with. A Naga, half human, half snake. Shapeshifters. Dangerous. She hissed and lunged. I barely dodged, and she crashed into the wall hard enough to leave a dent. There went part of my paycheck. She came again, fangs bared. I caught her by the neck, holding her back as she struggled, her venomous teeth inches from my face. Then voices, footsteps in the hall. We both froze. Slowly, she shifted back, panting. "I don't know what a hunter like you is doing here," she said quietly, "but my daughter and I haven't hurt anyone. We just came here to live with her father." I looked at her like she was insane. There was no way a monster didn't hurt someone. I should have gone in hard, done what hunters do, but I didn't. I went against what they were. I rubbed my forehead softly. 3 hours of sleep. My head throbbed. Let's say I believe you. Say you're some friendly monster just trying to live with her husband or whatever he is. Why put a monster child in a school of humans? Doesn't that seem irresponsible? Dangerous for any of the kids? The thought of some snot-nosed brat getting hurt made my blood boil. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head, like she expected me to finish them both off then and there. Maybe that was a safe assumption. I had planned on it. Change of plans, I guess, for now. "Do you really think there are schools for monsters?" she said. "It's not like we can build our own buildings just for our species. That's why we shifters learn to blend in. I would have expected hunters, studying us for hundreds of years, to know that. But I guess I expected too much from humans." The last part came out with a hiss. Poison in the voice, literal or not. "All right, fine. You make a fair point," I said. "But your daughter did try eating another kid. I can't just let that slide. I can't take you both out here where anyone can see, and I can't let her eat the other students." The two of them looked nervous. The mother, August, I'd learned, was a very serious woman, and a mother who would bite someone's head off literally. I thought for a long second, looking at both of them. "So how about this? I'll tutor your daughter. Teach her how to behave around humans, how to blend." My voice hardened. "I'm not thrilled about it. If either of you causes trouble, I will not hesitate." I went to my desk and took a sip of black coffee. If the other hunters found out I was sparing them, if they knew I hadn't dealt with them, my head would be on a pike. That thought was always close. Hunters run in the family. It's in the blood. You don't get out of it. I've been told that since I was a kid. The Hemmings name carries weight. Old scars, older promises. Some nights that legacy sits heavy behind my teeth. I didn't say that aloud. August hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. Teach her only what she needs. Don't fill her head with lies that monsters must be destroyed because of what we are." I almost barked at her. There are reasons hunters do what they do, but the bell for the next class was ringing and we couldn't keep going. I adjusted my tie and forced my face back into the mask. "Fine. I promise not to teach anything hunter-related, only what she needs for school." I mentally cataloged what else I had to do. Night work. That was the word I used at home. Investigating, watching, making sure there weren't more hiding in plain sight. I had a job to do after dark. That was when the real teeth of the world showed. I tried to cover the dent in the wall with some paint from the supply closet and walked them both out to the door. I closed it behind them and sat back at my desk. I closed my eyes for a beat and let the silence in. There were a lot of unsaid things. About August, about Annabelle, and about me. The agreement would buy them time. It would buy me something too, a way to watch, to learn, to prepare. The hunters in my family would not have approved. They were the kind of people who kept lists, kept trophies, kept blood at the ready. They believed in endings. I had always believed in endings too. But lately I kept feeling like I was straddling two sides of a knife. Sometimes the hair on my forearms would rise for no reason. Sometimes my jaw ached as if I'd been running all night. I told myself it was stress. That was easier. The door to the classroom stayed closed for a long time after they left. When I finally opened it, the hallway was empty and the dent in the wall looked less noticeable in the fluorescent light. I made a note in my planner. Tutor Annabelle, meet mother. Check dent repair costs. Check night patrol routes. I wrote the last line in the back of my head. This isn't over. This was only the beginning. Story 8. My friend and I found the abandoned church behind my town. Behind our town is a massive hill, stretching out either side with a forest of thick cedar trees at its edge. There's a rumor of an old church hidden behind it, and it's said that inside is a fountain that has special powers. It's more of an old wives' tale that gets passed around the town. That night, my friend and I decided we were going to find it. How the hell are you going to sneak out? Your parents are super strict, Claire said, resting her chin in her palm. I don't know. Probably just quietly through the back door. I shrugged. And if they find out you're gone, you're going to be grounded for a month. Again. She drummed her fingers lightly on the bench. Well, we could go during the day, I said, rolling my eyes. That's no fun, Claire said, with a playful glint in her eyes. What about your parents? I tiptoed around the question. What about them? Her nose wrinkled in distaste. I leaned in. Well, how are you a sneak out? She tilted her head slightly, eyes fixed on the ground, unfocused. They'll be too drunk to notice. I doubt they will even know I'm home to begin with. She tugged at her jacket sleeves, trying to pull them over her hands. Where do we meet? Her lips curled into a smile. The old highway sign in front of the hill. The bell for next period rang out, and I slung my backpack over my shoulder. What time? I asked as she dragged her satchel off the seat. 11. She narrowed her eyes, grinning. That night at the dinner table, my dad sighed, picking at his food. I got a call from your English teacher today. His eyes shifted to me. What did she say? I kept my head down. You're falling behind. Homework and studies. He glanced at my mom. Yeah, sorry It's that friend of yours, Clara. My dad interrupted, shoving food into his mouth. Claire. I pushed food around my plate. Whatever her name is, she's a bad influence on you. I mean, I've never seen her or her parents at church unless they're going for the food drive. He was starting to raise his voice. Charles. My mom scolded him. All I'm saying is, he put his knife and fork down. Your goal is to get good grades, so you can get into a good college and make something of yourself. That's all me and your mother want for you. Noted. I grunted. Maybe if her father didn't beat his daughter so much, she'd be as bright as you. He muttered. My face felt hot. I clenched my fists. Charles, that's enough. My mom said, her words short and sharp. I stood up, pushing the chair away and storming upstairs. My dad called out to me, but I ignored him. I ran up the stairs and into my room, slamming the door. My phone buzzed. Claire, hey, I snuck out early. Can we meet soon? I could still feel the anger burning. Yeah. I slid the phone into my pocket, threw my jacket on, and opened my window. Pushing the mesh off, I carefully slid out and put it back down. The roof creaked as I crept down it. Careful not to slip or make any noise. My knees screamed as I dropped into the backyard. I glanced at the kitchen window, and heard my parents arguing. I ducked into the bushes, then climbed over the fence into the alleyway next to our house and jogged towards the hill. My jacket did little against the cold night air. It took me about 10 minutes of walking to get to the sign, just outside of town. Claire was standing beneath it, smoking. The dim light of the embers illuminated her face softly in the dark. "Is that a cigarette?" I asked, approaching the sign. Yeah." She held it out to me. I caught her gaze and she looked away. "No thanks," I said, as casually as possible. I stole it from my dad. He was being a dick and I needed it. She took a long drag before dropping it and stomping it out. I stood there for a moment, thinking about what my dad had said. "Shall we?" She gestured toward the hill. "Why, yeah," I murmured. We climbed the hill, stopping occasionally to catch our breath. At the top, we could see the forest stretch out, tall, dense trees crowded for miles. I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw it was my dad. I clicked the phone off and slid it back into my pocket. "Your dad know you're gone?" Claire said, looking over at me. "He does now." I sighed. "Aren't you worried about getting grounded?" Her voice pushed clouds into the cold air. "Fuck him," I said, kicking a rock down the hill. Claire smiled, as if I had said something she'd been thinking for a while. We set off into the forest, using our phones as flashlights. Did we take into account that there might not be a church? I ventured, shining my light around in the darkness. "Well, it's a nice night for a walk in the forest." Claire laughed. "Do you know who you're taking to the winter prom?" She teased. My face felt warm. "Oh, I probably won't go," I said, stumbling my words. "Oh, yeah, PSSH me neither," Claire said, laughing nervously and throwing a rock she had picked up. A moment of silence fell over us as we pushed further in. "I hope you remember the way back out," I said, half joking, half worried that she might not have been paying attention. "I thought you were keeping track?" She said, turning to look at me. My face dropped. Her lips curled into a smile. "I'm fucking with you. I've been mapping it." I let out a sigh and laughed. "Fuck you, dud." My foot snagged on a tree root, and I went tumbling down a hill. Claire called my name, running down after me. I hit something hard at the bottom. A wall. "Ah, fuck." I groaned, grabbing my side in pain. Claire ran to my side, helping me sit up. "Are you okay, dude?" That looked like it hurt. I clenched my jaw. "I'm okay. I'm fine." She stood up and took a few steps back. "Oh, shit." Her voice trailed off. I stood up slowly and turned to face where she was looking. The church. White clapboard siding. Though the paint had long since started peeling and graying in the damp climate. The steeple rose up, its oxidized copper roof catching the beam of my light in a dull orange glow. The pine forest pressed close on every side of the building. The double doors sat partially open. "Fuck." My words caught in my throat. Me and Claire exchanged looks before she took a deep breath and stepped towards it. She pressed on one of the doors, pushing it inwards and creeping inside. I hesitated, looking around the forest before finally entering behind her. The inside was overgrown, with trees growing through the broken windows. Grass and weeds were pushing through the floorboards. There was a damp smell that hung in the air, rot and earth and something older. "This is creepy as hell," Claire whispered, walking down the aisle. Looking up at the ceiling, I followed behind her, looking between the pews. They were all either warped, broken, or flipped over. "Well, I don't see a fountain anywhere." Claire clicked her tongue, stopping at the altar. I paced over to a closet and pulled the door open. Dust exploded outwards, sending me into a coughing fit. I shone my light inside, revealing old robes, some Bibles stacked lazily in a corner, and a large concrete slab. "Hey, Claire, check this out." I called over to her. She walked over, peeking inside. "Spooky," she said, touching the robe with her fingers. "No, dude, look." I pointed at the slab. "Now we're talking." She grinned. "Come on, help me move it." We pulled it out, dragging it along the floorboards. Underneath was a round hole, with a passageway that led down. A rusted metal ladder disappeared into the dark. Fuck, I don't know if I want to go down there, I said, nervously shining my light down the hole. Claire bit her lip, deep in thought, before looking at me and grinning. See you on the other side. Before I could react, she began climbing down the ladder. It creaked and groaned as she descended. Fuck, I muttered under my breath, climbing down after her. The air grew heavier as I descended. The ladder didn't feel stable at all, and I was worried it would break at any moment. My palms were slick against the cold metal rungs. It was a long way down, taking about a minute to reach the bottom. The hole opened up into a hallway made of stone. Claire was waiting at the bottom, shining her light around the small space. I wasn't typically a claustrophobic person, but the walls seemed to squeeze inwards. The ceiling was low enough that I had to duck my head slightly. The stone was damp to the touch. Let's find this fountain, hey? Claire murmured. Claire, wait. I replied, this seems dangerous. She turned, awkwardly shifting to fit her shoulders in the small space. We'll be okay. She flashed a reassuring smile. I didn't feel very reassured. What if we get hurt down here? I asked, trying to keep her from continuing down the corridor. She just rolled her eyes and smiled. Come on, you worry too much. I took a breath and followed her reluctantly. The hallway stretched on. Our footsteps echoed strangely against the stone. The beam from my phone light seemed weaker down here, swallowed by the dark before it could reach very far. Finally, the corridor opened into a kind of atrium, a circular room with corridors branching off in multiple directions. Now this is cool. Claire laughed in disbelief. I had to admit I was pretty impressed. I paced around the room slowly. The stone walls were smooth, almost polished. There were markings carved into them, worn too smooth to read. What do you think they use this for? I asked, shining my light around. Probably for sacrificing people. I laughed nervously. Well, thank fuck it's abandoned. Claire turned her head to look at me. That we know of. The air was thick and heavy. The atrium was completely silent. So silent I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. So silent I could hear Claire breathing beside me. Well, Claire spun around. Let's pick a corridor, I guess. Wait. My heart dropped. What corridor did we enter from? Oh, it was... She turned and ran her tongue over her teeth in thought. She pursed her lips. We might be fucked. I threw my hands in the air. God damn it, Claire. I fucking told you this was a bad idea. She rolled her eyes. We're fine. We'll just split up and pick a corridor each, and when we find it, we will meet back here. You're kidding. There's no fucking way I'm splitting up down here. I couldn't believe how casual she was being. Come on, Bailey. Nothing bad ever happens to girls who split up in creepy tunnels. She teased. She caught my look of disapproval, and she sighed. Okay, fine. We'll explore together. I let out a sigh of relief. I couldn't tell if she was joking the whole time. She spun in a circle with her arm out and finger pointed and stopped on a random corridor. This one. I rubbed my face with my hands. Sure. She started down the hallway, and after some internal debate, I followed. Where do you think these all lead? I asked, tracing my hand along the grooves in the stone. Well, this one leads to the sacrifice chamber, and the other leads to more sacrifice chambers. I sighed. I'm serious, Claire. All right, sorry. Just try to lighten the mood. Eventually, the hallway opened up into a small room. It was an office, complete with bookshelves lined with binders and an old wooden desk, covered in paper and documents. We found the office. Claire clicked her tongue. Shit, I groaned, shining my light on the documents splayed out on the table. They were mostly receipts, corporate jargon that I couldn't understand, some shipping manifestos. Claire pulled a binder off the shelf and opened it on the desk. Whoa. Her eyes lit up. I looked over her shoulder at the contents of the binder. Pages and pages of photocopies of people's passport photos. What the fuck? I mouthed. She flicked through the rest of the pages before closing it and grabbing another one. The next binder was filled with more photos. Is this all the people from the church, maybe? Claire ventured, sliding out a random photo and flipping it over. Richard Milson, she continued, reading the name on the back, written in black ink. Do you think they killed these people? My voice came out hoarse. Yeah, she said, grinning. Maybe they were all murdered. I'm being serious. I pushed her playfully. I don't know, she shrugged. Whatever reason, though, it's still creepy as hell. She pushed me back, laughing. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm keen to get the hell out of here. I muttered. Are you kidding? Claire closed the binder. We've hit the jackpot. We can't bail now. Claire, seriously, it's dangerous down here. We need to find a way out and head back. I tried to command some urgency into my voice. Okay, she sighed, crossing her arms. Gotta get home to your nice bed and your loving parents. I get it. Oh, come on. Don't put that bullshit on me. You know that's not fair. I argued back. It was your idea to come down here at night. I thought you were keeping track of the fucking directions in this fucking death trap. Her face twisted in disgust. You know what? You're such a perfect fucking grade A student. Find your own way out. Do you have a problem with me? Because you seem to be bringing up shit that isn't relevant to our fucking situation right now. I yelled back. Our voices echoed loudly through the tunnels. You have no idea how good you fucking have it, do you? Claire was interrupted by a noise echoing from inside the tunnels. What the fuck was that? I spun towards the doorway, breath ragged from the argument. Nothing. It was probably just your complaining bouncing off the fucking ceiling. Claire pushed past me, her eyes wet, and stormed down the hallway, her light bouncing around in the darkness. God fucking damn it. I yelled, feeling my own tears streaming down my cheeks. Claire, wait, please. I called after her, heart racing, not wanting to lose her in the darkness. What's wrong? Too scared to find her own way out. She yelled over her shoulder. Her light disappeared ahead, and I picked up the pace trying to catch up. Claire, please wait. I screamed after her, terrified of being alone. I ran out into the atrium, and it was completely empty. My breaths were fast, and my heart was racing. Claire, please don't leave me here, please. I called out, trying to listen for her. I knelt down, sobbing into my arms, feeling completely alone in the dark, silence being interrupted by my hitching sobs. I'm sorry, please, I'm sorry. I was so desperate for her to come back, I would have done anything. I sat there in the dark for minutes, trying to regulate my breathing, listening for any clues to which direction she went in. Bailey, my head shot up, hearing Claire's voice echo from the corridor. Claire? Claire. I jumped up. Please, Claire, where are you? After a pause, her voice called out again, seemingly from everywhere. Bailey, help. Claire, please. Keep talking so I can find you. I called out, nose still running. Bailey, please, help. Her voice called out again, and I thought I could hear it coming from my left. There were 3 passageways it could have been though, and the way her voice echoed, I couldn't be sure. I picked the middle corridor and took off, sprinting down the passageway. My light barely illuminated the space in front of me. Claire, I'm coming. I called out again. I came to the end of the corridor and into a much bigger room. It was another corridor with rows of doors on the left and right. Claire, my voice cracked. Silence. I thought I might have taken the wrong passageway, until something slammed against the inside of one of the doors. I screamed, falling back, startled by the sudden noise. Claire, I called out again. Stop fucking around and come out. A shiver ran down my spine when I heard her voice again. Bailey, let me out, please. Claire's voice came from the other side of the door. Did you accidentally lock yourself in? I asked into the darkness. My breathing was ragged, and I couldn't hear anything over my heart thumping in my ears. I slowly climbed to my feet and crept towards the door. A low, soft, crying noise came from the inside of one of the rooms. I hesitated at the doorway and pressed my ear against it. Bailey, I'm sorry. Please let me out. Claire's voice came directly from the other side of the door. My hand closed around the lock on the brass handle of the door. I hesitated, waiting for an excuse not to open it. I squeezed my eyes shut and unlocked the door, stepping back and shining my light. After a few seconds, The handle twisted slowly, and the door swung inwards with a long, drawn-out groan. I swallowed hard. See, Claire? Silence fell over the hallway. My light shook in my hands as I tried to keep it steady on the doorway. My heart dropped as a face slowly peered out from the doorway. Long, matted black hair, and a pale face with huge pupils peered out, revealing a gaping mouth with no teeth. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. I was completely frozen in fear, staring in horror as it slowly slunk out of the room. Thin, frail hands crept over its face, shielding it from my light. It screamed, ear-piercing, guttural, a noise that shot me into action. I turned and sprinted down the hallway, screaming, absolute terror filling my body, adrenaline surging through me. I could hear something running behind me, bare feet slapping against the floor. I burst out into the atrium and picked a random tunnel and ran down it, hoping to lose whatever the fuck was chasing me. I came out in another room. I barely registered any details of the room, just running towards a door, partially open. It led down a set of stairs, and I hurried down it, careful not to fall. The smell hit me as soon as I hit the end of the staircase. I covered my mouth and nose, retching violently. The room smelled of rot meat and shit. Literal shit. I raised my flashlight to illuminate the space. The floor was stained red and black, and covering the walls were smears of what looked and smelt of blood and shit. I gagged and puked all over my feet. I dry retched again, too scared to go back up the stairs, but unable to stay in the room any longer. I scanned the room for any other way out, but was only met with more bodily fluid smeared walls. I couldn't take it. The smell was making my vision double. I ran back up the stairs. I slowly crept back through the door, scanning the room with the light before entering. I couldn't see the creature anywhere, and I crept further inside. The room had a wooden table, stained a deep red, with a bucket and a large plastic container underneath. I looked in the container for a weapon, but found only old wallets, car keys, and some random crap that looked as if a bunch of people had emptied their pockets inside it. I heard something from far off in the tunnels, and I stopped, going completely silent and still, listening to hear if it was coming towards me. When it went silent, I took a deep breath, saying a silent prayer and continuing to look. My eyes landed on a metal fireplace poker, and I lunged for it, picking it up and holding it close to me. I felt a little better having some kind of weapon, but the knowledge I'd have to venture back down the hallway to get out was so terrifying I wondered if I'd ever leave. I felt tears on my cheeks again, and a lump caught in my throat. I had the overwhelming sense of guilt remembering that Claire was down here with me, and I'd accidentally released something, and it was probably going after her now. I decided that I had to do something. Even if the thing killed me, I had to save Claire. Hesitating for another moment, I squeezed a fireplace poker, cold in my hands, and went back down the hallway. I held it out in front of me, feeling the weight of it in my hand. The main atrium was empty, and the silence was deafening. I spun slowly in the middle, swinging my light, trying to look down the hallways. My heart thumped in my ears, and I picked another corridor at random, creeping down it, poker raised. I made it halfway down the corridor when I heard something scream behind me, the same ear-piercing cry that would haunt me the rest of my life. I screamed too, taking off sprinting to the end of the corridor. I heard the bare feet slapping behind me, closer and closer. I screamed louder, pure fear and terror pumping through me. I ran straight into something cold and hard. My hands closed around it, the rungs of the ladder. I wasn't even afforded a sigh of relief. Hearing the thing closing in right behind me, I threw myself up the ladder, phone barely hanging on in one hand, and trying to hold on to the poker in the other. My hands were greasy with sweat, and occasionally they would slip off the rungs. The ladder shifted below me, creaking and groaning as the thing seemingly climbed after me. The poker slid out of my hand, and I heard it hit something with a wet thump. The climb felt endless, pure panic being the only thing driving me upwards. I finally came out into the closet, pulling myself up desperately, still sobbing. I pushed the heavy concrete slab back over the hole. Still crying, I backed away from it, before sprinting to the church and out into the cold night air. Hey, you took your time. Claire's voice came from beside the doors. She was leaning against the wall, clicking her lighter on and off. A mixture of fear, guilt, and rage washed over me, and I broke down crying, falling into her arms. She stood there, stunned. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even form coherent sentences. I just sobbed right into her jacket for a minute. Oh, shit. Bailey, you good? You smell awful. She nervously patted my back. I lifted my head, snot and tears covering her jacket. We need to go now. I cried. All right. What the fuck did you see down there, dude? I yanked her arm, and we climbed back up the hill, the entire way back to the forest. She wouldn't stop asking me questions. I ignored them and pulled her back through the trees, making her guide the way. She walked me back home. My heart dropped as we stood at the end of the street. Blue and red flashing lights illuminated my house. I ran to the door. Claire stayed at the end of the street. I burst through into the living room, where my parents were sat, holding each other. Mom crying as a policeman sat across from them. As soon as they saw me, they rushed over and wrapped me in a hug. I cried again, harder than I ever had before, harder than I thought possible. So hard that no noise came out, as if the pressure in my head would make my eyes explode. They had called the police soon after I snuck out. I'd been gone 3.5 hours. I struggled to figure out what to tell the police, eventually landing on a convincing lie that I had gotten lost in the forest. My parents knew I had been with Claire, and I didn't care. I never spoke to her again after that night. I ignored her at school, and after a few days, she understood and left me alone. To this day, I still have nightmares about that church, and whatever the fuck is happening beneath it. Story 9. I used to live up north, and this is why I moved. I used to live in a small town up north. Like, up north where it's snowing for half the year. I was born there, and stayed until I was 13. My dad was a fisherman who would go out to sea for weeks at a time, and my mom stayed home to take care of me. It wasn't the best childhood, but I had parents who cared about me. The reason why we left when I was in 7th grade was when I was walking home from school one winter. When you live in the subarctic, the nights get longer. I stayed around school a little bit to check out the northern lights. I would always look at them by the window at school, so much that I would sometimes need to be told by my teacher, stay focused. I looked at the lights in the sky at the beach by my school, but then I saw a pair of eyes closer to the sand. They were looking straight at me. My mom and my teacher, Mr. LaCroix, would sometimes tell me that polar bears hung out that time of year. But I thought 5 minutes after school wouldn't be so bad. I didn't run. Not right away. I kept looking at those eyes, and backed away slowly. My heart was already pounding. My eyes were darting around for any escape. That was the thing in my town. People left the car doors unlocked in case anyone came across a bear. I saw a truck, a black pickup with big wheels, and when I got close enough, I finally booked inside and slammed the door shut. I pulled up the locks on both sides as soon as I got inside, and the bear was 10 feet away when I got inside. Clawing at the door, I started crying, curled up in the back of this truck, with this polar bear lurking around outside. I just thought, I want to go home. I want to go home. I don't want to die. Why can't this bear go away? The white bear was hungry, and when it wasn't pawing at the door, it was staring at me through the window. Its eyes reflected off the northern lights to beam right back at me. My dad was out fishing, and my mom was home and couldn't get out there. The snow was thick, and more was coming down on that night. I knew I wasn't going to outrun the bear. I was only lucky to have found the truck, and had the good sense to back up as to not trigger the bear to start charging towards me. I didn't know whose truck it was, but I was glad it was there. It had to have been a teacher, whichever one it was. So I was stuck there, locked in a truck with a polar bear staring at me and waiting for me to come out. It was patient, and I knew I couldn't wait as long as it could. It felt like forever being in that truck for hours, just seeing the bear stare at me from outside the truck. It sat there waiting. That was the thing I was most afraid about. It sat and waited, as if it had all the time in the world. It made a noise. It could be a yawn or a growl. But I heard what came close to come out. I was so cold, so hungry in that truck. I tried the keys, but the engine sputtered. The truck was frozen solid. I tried to keep myself warm in my layers of clothing and kept looking through the window at the bear. One of the teachers, Mr. LaCroix, came out from a nearby door of the school, but he was frozen by the sight of the bear. He ran back inside, but the bear charged after him, crashing through the door. I forced my legs through the knee-deep snow. Every step felt heavier than the last, but I couldn't stop. I forced myself to run until I reached my house and got inside. My mom grabbed me and, of course, asked where I was. All I could say to her was, "Bear." The morning after, my mom didn't let me go to school because of the snow, and after hearing on the local radio that Mr. LaCroix died from the bear attack, part of me feels guilty for staying out, since he would have gotten his truck safe and I would have been at home. Everyone had to wait until the police scared off the bears away from the school, and any that could be captured were put in a facility until they could be released. Even after the bears were cleared out, the road still had to be cleared. Everything took months to do, and it was until June that people were on the roads and streets again. I was relieved, but also scared because they could come back in the winter again. I'm glad to be alive, and not many people would have made it in my place. When summer came, my parents and I decided to move. My dad became a warehouse worker in the big city, and my mom worked at the mall. Even though I missed my friends in elementary school, I made some new friends in high school and in college. I don't think I could have stayed in that town, with bears coming every winter. Whenever it snows, I'm always reminded of my old home. But some snowy nights, I think about the northern lights and the night I saw the bear staring at me. I don't think the bear was evil. It was only doing what it needed to survive. That doesn't mean I want to be anywhere near one again. There's not much for me to say except something I heard about how to deal with bears. If it's black, fight back. If it's brown, lie down. If it's white, say goodnight. Story 10. The passengers suddenly started crying when looking at the sea. I stepped off the tour bus and smelled the sea. The laughter of other passengers mixed with the cool breeze as I looked at the cruise ship towering over the dock. The excursion to the historic center had been perfect. Local food, souvenirs, and dozens of photos, mostly of street cats. I was looking forward to the dinner on board, during which the ship was going to leave the port and begin a 7-day journey across the Atlantic towards the Caribbean. After I changed clothes and freshened up in my cabin, I headed to the main dining room. An announcement was made that the departure is delayed by about 10 minutes due to a pair of passengers being late. Oh, well, the second time during the cruise that this has happened. I walked past slightly annoyed-looking passengers and reached the dining room. It was a beautiful restaurant, stretching across the width of the ship and towering 3 decks high. It was decorated with white panels, completed with blue decorations on the tables and the chandeliers. Most passengers were already seated, while I was led to a small table for 2 in the back half of the hall. I couldn't see out of any windows, but I wasn't bothered by it because the food was very good. The other people were talking, laughing, and enjoying their vacation. I finished the main course and was looking forward to my dessert when I first noticed a couple sitting next to a window. The window was slightly dirty and had round corners, But what caught my attention was that they were crying. They didn't look particularly sad, but there were tears streaming down their face. Without talking, they stood up simultaneously and left. Soon after, I heard shouting and loud noises outside the dining hall, but I didn't think much of it and finished my dessert. I did not see the couple afterwards and headed for a small library lounge on one of the lower decks. On my way, I saw multiple crew members speaking quietly to each other while looking slightly nervous. After I sat down with my book, a crime novel from the 30s, I felt a slight sense of dread. I was sure it came from an overall feeling of unease coming from nearby crew members. After I noticed two of them talking, I started walking slowly in their general direction, pretending to look at the bookshelves. They were brought to the cooling room on deck 3, I heard one of them say, followed by, "I heard it was a mess. I am glad we were not there." They then walked away, leaving me wondering what they were talking about. I wasn't in the mood for my book anymore and headed upwards toward the open decks to catch some fresh air. I walked up the stairs, deck by deck, thinking about the two crew members. What kind of mess were they talking about? Why the cooling room? Just as I reached the top of the stairs, heading for the door leading to the upper deck, a young woman opened the door and came back inside. Or should I say, she just walked straight through the door without even lifting her hand. Her body just walked against the doors and pushed them open while walking slowly forward, like an unstoppable object. She looked straight ahead, not noticing anyone around her, but I immediately saw the tears. Not small ones, but a stream of tears running down her face. She did not even try to brush them away, just kept walking toward the stairs while looking forward. She slowly walked past me. I thought she was going back to her cabin, but she suddenly stopped in the middle of the stairway. She slowly turned around with a smile, not a happy smile, but one you would give a crying child, a smile filled with compassion and pity. Suddenly, she bowed down and slammed her head forwards with an enormous force against the edge of a stair. Blood covered the stairs, and the sound of her skull splitting open echoed from the steel walls of the stairwell. I ran. I should have alerted a crew member or tried to administer first aid, but the feeling of unease was so big that I immediately ran outside on the open deck. But what I saw there made me stop in an instant. About 5 passengers were outside. 10 more were lying on the ground covered in blood. The 5 passengers all smiled with tears running down their face. One of them had a thin, broken steel rod in his hands. But before I could see what it planned to do with it, I screamed and ran back inside, past the woman on the floor, and straight into my cabin. I slammed the door shut and sat down, burying my face in my hands and sobbing. I examined my cabin. Everything was clean and tidy. I wish I had a balcony or even a window, but I just stared against the wall. The slow movement of the ship was soothing, and I calmed down a bit. I sat on the ground for what feels like hours until I gathered the courage to peek outside the cabin again. I opened the door and looked down the hallway. It was quiet. The handrail on the side of the hallway had red stains on one spot, which I quickly looked away from. I moved towards the lifeboat deck to look for a crew member. I headed up one deck, and just before the door leading to the lifeboats, I stopped. Letters, written in dried blood, covered the glass window of the door. "Don't look down," was all it said. I hesitated and refrained from pushing the door open. I turned around and saw a woman looking at me from a few meters away. I immediately looked at her eyes, and thankfully, there were no tears, just a frightened look. I immediately felt that her gaze also went straight to my eyes to check for tears. "Did you look?" she yelled at me. I told her that I didn't. After coming closer, I asked her if she knew what happened. Passengers all across the ship have started to cry and hurt themselves. I don't know what comes over them. I first noticed when I was chatting with a guy in the main atrium, when he suddenly looked out the window and started crying almost like someone told him his family died. But he did not look like he was sad. He looked like he is sad for someone else, overwhelmed by compassion. He went and she started sobbing, but she did not have to continue. We both knew what happened to everyone that looked. After she introduced herself as Sarah, we decided to move further to the front of the ship in search of crew members who might be able to contact emergency services. It was already strange that no one showed up. We were still close enough to shore for helicopters or the Coast Guard to reach us. We tried to use our smartphones, but there was no signal. The ship's Wi-Fi, advertised by the cruise company for being one of the fastest on the sea, had vanished. As we were moving forward, passengers with tears streaming down their faces walked inside from the lifeboat deck, but we never looked at them for long. Just before reaching the front of the ship, we saw a panicked crew member walking towards the lifeboats. He saw us and gestured us to come. Even though the crying passengers were never paying attention to us, he was whispering. They looked, all of the officers on the bridge, they looked. The feeling of unease intensified. If there is no one on the bridge anymore, we cannot contact the outside or turn around. The crew member, who introduced himself as Jim, told us he was going to try and lower a lifeboat to escape while wearing a blindfold. With a nod of approval, we prepared to go out on the lifeboat deck, tying a ripped sleeve storing our heads. Jim went first and pushed the door open. Cold air hit our faces like 1,000 needles. We slowly moved forward and then to the left. After about 7 meters, we reached a lifeboat crane. Jim pulled a lever, and the lifeboat began to ascend from the top of our heads toward the deck level so that passengers could enter. Just before it reached the floor, a part of the crane arm descending from the ceiling hit my head and ripped my blindfold from my eyes. The impact threw me to the ground and left me disoriented. I heard the others scream something to me, but I felt dizzy and only heard their voices as a faint rumbling. I opened my eyes. I saw the waves below me, a beautiful sight with the moonlight reflecting in the waves. First I saw nothing, then I noticed motion beneath the waves. I thought the motion came from sharks or dolphins judging by the size, but after my eyes adjusted to dark, I realized human bodies moving with the ship. One of the bodies reached its hand toward the hull and started climbing, somehow having a grip on the perfectly flat surface of the ship. The body seemed long drowned but climbed upwards with a wide, smiling mouth. Poor thing, I thought. It must be so cold and hungry. I felt pity for it, as if I found a dying animal on the road. Tears started streaming down my face. I could feel that it was so hungry, starved for years. If only I could give it something to eat. The tears kept coming. It reached the top and smiled at me. If only I had food on me. Maybe I could give it something of mine. It needs my body more than me. It looks so weak and desperate for food, smiling so friendly. The sharp edge of the railing caught my attention. If only I could give it something to eat. I was standing in front of the railing, slowly raising my head. I wanted to crack my head open to give the creature food. It filled me with joy knowing that it would finally be able to eat something. Just as my neck muscle prepared to slam down, a hand tried to grab the back of my shirt. It did not bother me. I was concentrated on the railing. Suddenly, the hand grabbed me and violently pulled me back. It was Sarah, pulling me into the lifeboat. The smile on the creature vanished, and it opened its mouth wide to reveal many rows of sharp teeth. Its gaze was suddenly filled with unfathomable anger. It leapt forward, but the lifeboat already lowered. It felt like an eternity to reach the waterline, but as soon as we touched down, I stopped crying. Confused and scared, we sailed toward the coast while the ship slowly disappeared behind the horizon.